A solitary figure stands on a Montana Ridge rifle, silhouetted against the fading light. Below, horses scatter as men in tactical gear move with military precision through the darkness. Some wounds don't heal. They wait, like poison in groundwater. They seep through the foundations of a life until everything crumbles. They say vengeance is hollow, that justice brings no peace. They've never watched someone they love die for knowing too much about the wrong people. 2 years I've lived in the quiet. 2 years since they buried him. 2 years watching the same men grow rich while others fall sick from water they swore was clean. Tonight they came for my horses, the last gift he gave me. They didn't kill me. That was their mistake. In these mountains there's a name they used to whisper around campfires. A tracker who could read the land like others read books. A hunter who moved like a shadow. They thought that woman was gone. They were wrong. Montana 2023. Dawn painted the Logan Valley in shades of amber and gold. Lynn Morgan stood on her porch, coffee mug steaming in the crisp morning air. At 42, her slender frame still carried the quiet strength that had made her legendary. Her dark hair, now streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back in a practical braid. The fine lines around her eyes spoke of both laughter and loss. Across the pasture, horses grazed contentedly. Phantom, a magnificent black stallion with a single white blaze, raised his head to watch her. The horse's intelligent eyes seemed to hold a knowing beyond his kind. "Just us against the world, boy," Lynn whispered. 2 years had passed since Samuel's death. 2 years since she'd buried her veterinarian husband, and with him, the future they'd planned. 2 years of rebuilding a life that made sense without him in it. She set down her coffee and reached for the worn leather holster hanging by the door. Old habits die hard. 15 years as the most respected sheriff in 3 counties had ingrained certain routines. Though she'd turned in her badge after Samuel's death, she still checked her weapon each morning, a ritual that connected her to the woman she once was. The locals still whispered about Eagle Eye Morgan when they thought she couldn't hear. How she could track a man across 5 counties by the smallest signs. How she could read a criminal's next move before he made it. How she'd brought order to a territory others had written off. But that was before the accident that took Samuel, before she'd retreated to their horse ranch. Daybreak to live in self-imposed exile. A truck rumbled up the dirt road, breaking her reverie. Noah Thompson's beaten-up Ford kicked up dust as it approached. The 16-year-old boy worked part-time at Daybreak, helping with chores too demanding for one person. "Mornin', Miss Morgan," Noah called, jumping down from the cab. Gangly and earnest, the boy idolized Lynn in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Got those fence supplies you ordered?" Lynn nodded, helping him unload. "Your mother doing better?" "Yes, ma'am. That medicine Dr. Chen prescribed is working." A shadow crossed his young face. "But it's expensive." "Don't." Lynn made a mental note to speak with Grace about it, as the only doctor within 50 miles who would treat patients regardless of their ability to pay. Grace Chen was fighting her own battle against the systems crushing this valley. "Heard some strangers asking about you in town?" Noah said casually, carrying fence posts toward the barn. Lynn's steps faltered. "What kind of strangers?" "City types, expensive boots but dusty like they'd been traveling. Asked Joe at the diner if Eagle Eye Morgan still lived around here." A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air settled between Lynn's shoulder blades. "What else?" "Asked about your horses, specifically about the black stallion." "Phantom Noah, I want you to finish early today. Go straight home." The boy studied her face. "Is something wrong, Miss Morgan?" "Just a precaution." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Tell your mother I'll drop by tomorrow with those books I promised." After Noah left, Lynn retrieved her binoculars from beside the rifle cabinet. From the highest point of her property, she scanned the surrounding countryside. Nothing seemed out of place, but instincts honed over years in law enforcement were screaming warnings. Someone was watching, someone who knew her past, someone who knew about Phantom. As dusk approached, Lynn secured the horses in the barn, rather than leaving them in the pasture as usual. Phantom resisted, sensing her tension. "Just for tonight, boy," she murmured, stroking his muscular neck. "Just to be safe." She set up a makeshift bed in the tack room, her rifle within arm's reach. Sleep came in fits and starts her subconscious, replaying fragments of past investigations, faces of criminals she'd put away, enemies who might hold grudges. The sound that woke her wasn't loud, just wrong. A metal latch moving when it shouldn't. Lynn was on her feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving silently through the darkness. Years of training kicked in. Automatically stay low, use cover control, your breathing, voices outside male, keeping their tones hushed. At least 4, maybe more. Professional coordinated. Take all of them. The Black One's special boss wants him alive and unharmed. What about the woman? Leave her. This isn't about her. Yet Lynn's mind worked through options rapidly. 4 armed men against 1 bad odds, even for her. The horses were the target, not her. If she tried to intervene, people would die. Maybe her, maybe them. Neither outcome helped the horses. Sometimes surviving meant knowing when not to fight. Her father had taught her that long before she pinned on a badge. She watched from the shadows as they loaded her horses into trailers. Phantom fought viciously, requiring 3 men to control him. Good boy, she thought fiercely. Only when they'd gone did Lynn emerge, memorizing tire tracks, boot prints, every detail that might help her track them. Old skills resurfacing with practiced ease. Dawn found her in Sheriff Ryan Coulter's office. At 50, Coulter retained the solid build of his younger days when he and Lynn had patrolled together. Gray touched his temples now, and the lines around his mouth had deepened, but his eyes were still sharp. Jesus, Lynn, all of them. Every last one. Her voice remained steady, including Phantom. Coulter's expression softened momentarily. He knew what the stallion meant to her. Samuel's last gift before the accident. Professional job. Very at least 6 men. Military precision. They knew the property layout. You're lucky you weren't hurt. It wasn't luck. They deliberately avoided confrontation. Lynn leaned forward. They were asking about me in town first, specifically about Eagle Eye, Morgan and Phantom. This wasn't random, Ryan. Coulter sighed, rubbing his jaw. I'll put out an alert, but horse theft is tough. They're probably already across county lines. I need to see the case files on Samuel's accident. His expression changed subtly. That was 2 years ago. Lynn tragic but straightforward. He took that curve too fast in the rain. Please, Ryan, I need to verify something. Reluctance flashed across his features, but he nodded. Give me a couple days to dig them up from archives. Lynn left unsatisfied. Coulter's response felt wrong. Too dismissive, too eager to keep the past buried. Her next stop was Dr. Grace Chen's clinic on the edge of town. At 45, Grace possessed both the meticulous precision of her medical training and the practical creativity required to serve an under-resourced rural community. The 2 women had formed an unlikely friendship over the years, bound by their shared outsider status in the predominantly white ranching community. Horse thieves. Grace's dark eyes widened as Lynn explained the situation. That's strangely old-fashioned crime for 2023. It's not about the horses. Lynn paced the small office. They're a means to an end. Someone's sending a message. Who would do that? You've been out of law enforcement for 2 years. I put away a lot of people before that. Some of them are probably out now. Grace studied her friend. You're not telling me everything. Lynn hesitated. The way they operated, it reminds me of the Cascade crew, professional thieves who work across state lines. But they typically hit banks' high-end retailers, not horse ranches. Unless they knew who owned the ranch. Grace's expression turned thoughtful. You need to be careful, Lynn. If someone from your past is targeting you. I need information more than caution right now. Lynn lowered her voice. Ryan's being strangely reluctant about Samuel's accident files. Grace's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. That doesn't surprise me. Why? The doctor hesitated. There are rumors about Sheriff Coulter. Nothing concrete, but tell me. Some patients mention seeing him with Maxwell Blackstone, more than seems appropriate for a sheriff and the region's biggest businessman, Maxwell Blackstone. The name alone chilled Lynn's blood. Owner of Blackstone Mining Corporation, the largest employer in 3 counties. His wealth and influence extended throughout the state. On paper, a respectable businessman, but rumors had swirled for years about how he'd acquired his empire. What kind of meetings? Late night at Blackstone's hunting lodge. Very private. Grace hesitated. And not long after some investigations into mining safety violations mysteriously disappeared. Lynn absorbed this, her mind making connections. I need your help, Grace. I need to know who's been asking about me in town, and I need to find my horses before they disappear forever. I have patients coming in 10 minutes. Grace's eyes softened. But I'll ask around carefully. That afternoon, Lynn drove to the neighboring county where an old friend from her law enforcement days now ran a private security firm. Jackson Reed had been the best forensic analyst in the state before budget cuts eliminated his position, horse theft with paramilitary precision. Jackson whistled low, examining the photos Lynn had taken of the boot prints and tire tracks. That's not your average criminal. What can you tell me? These treads belong to a high-end tactical boot favored by private security contractors. He pointed to another print. And this one's interesting. See this distinctive wear pattern. Someone with a slight limp favoring their right leg. Lynn committed the detail to memory. What about the vehicles? Heavy-duty trucks with custom trailers. Professional equipment. Jackson studied her face. This is personal, isn't it? I think it might be. Be careful, Lynn. If someone's going to all this trouble. He didn't finish the thought. 3 days passed with no word from Sheriff Coulter about Samuel's accident files. Lynn's calls went straight to voicemail. Her frustration mounting, she decided to take matters into her own hands. The county records office closed at 5 by 5:30. The building was empty except for the cleaning staff. Lynn waited in her truck until the last car left the parking lot. Breaking and entering wasn't her style, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The back door's lock was simple enough. Inside the records room required an access card, but Lynn knew the maintenance override code. Some things didn't change even in 2 years. Samuel's accident file should have been easily located. Instead, she found an empty folder with a transfer slip indicating the contents had been moved to secure storage by order of Sheriff Coulter 3 months ago. 3 months ago. Why would Ryan move a closed case file after it had sat in regular storage for over a year and a half? On her way out, a name on another folder caught her eye. Thompson Noah's family. Curiosity piqued, she pulled it open. Inside was a medical report detailing soil and water testing from the Thompson property, which bordered one of Blackstone's smaller mining operations. The results showed alarming levels of heavy metals and chemical compounds consistent with mining runoff. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the report. Maintain confidentiality per MB directive. No further testing authorized, MB. Maxwell Blackstone Lynn photographed the documents with her phone before carefully replacing the folder. Her mind raced with implications. The mysterious illness affecting Noah's mother might not be so mysterious after all. Back at daybreak, Lynn found Noah waiting on her porch. His expression tense. Someone broke into our house today, he blurted as she approached. They tore everything apart. Mom's scared. Was anything taken? Just Dad's old laptop. It hasn't worked in years. The boy hesitated. Ms. Morgan, I think they were looking for something specific. They left Mom's jewelry, the TV, everything valuable. Where's your mother now? With Mrs. Chen at the clinic, she was pretty shaken up. Lynn's instincts sharpened. Noah, has anyone been asking about me or your family? The boy nodded slowly. A man came by last week, said he was from the mining company doing routine checks on water quality, asked if we knew you well, if you ever talked about your sheriff days. Pieces started connecting in Lynn's mind, forming a disturbing pattern. The horse theft, the stolen laptop, the buried medical report. Someone was systematically removing evidence of something, and they believed Lynn might have information they needed. Noah, I want you and your mother to stay at Grace's tonight. Don't go home. What's happening, Miss Morgan? Fear edged his voice. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. After the boy left, Lynn retrieved a locked box from beneath the floorboards in her bedroom. Inside was her old service weapon badges from different jurisdictions and a small notebook containing contacts from her law enforcement days. At the very bottom lay a phone number she'd hoped never to use again. The call connected after 3 rings, Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Lynn Morgan. I need to speak with Agent Dawson. A pause. Agent Dawson retired 2 years ago. Then find me whoever took over his cases. Tell them it's about Maxwell Blackstone. After 20 minutes later, her phone rang. Miss Morgan, this is Agent Rivera. You mentioned Blackstone. I think he's connected to some criminal activity in Logan Valley, and possibly to my husband's death. That's a serious accusation. I have evidence of environmental contamination being covered up, and reason to believe the local sheriff might be compromised. The agent's tone remained professional but gained interest. We've had our eye on Blackstone for a while. Nothing concrete enough for charges. I need protection for some locals who might be in danger, and I need help recovering stolen property. I can have someone in your area within 48 hours. In the meantime, document everything and stay safe. After hanging up, Lynn felt marginally better, but 48 hours was a long time if Blackstone's people decided to accelerate their timeline. As night fell, she secured the house and set up watch positions. Sleep wasn't an option. Too many unknowns. Too many threats circling. Around midnight, headlights appeared on the distant road. Lynn positioned herself by the window, rifle ready. The vehicle stopped at her gate, then continued past a warning, a reconnaissance. Either way, they were watching. Dawn broke with a call from Grace. Noah's gone, her friend said without preamble. His mother woke up and he wasn't there. Left a note saying he was going to get evidence from their house. Damn it! Lynn was already pulling on her boots. I'll find him. The Thompson property was eerily quiet when Lynn arrived. Noah's mother's car was gone, still at Grace's clinic. No other vehicles in sight. The front door stood partially open. Noah, Lynn called, her hand on her sidearm as she approached. No response. Inside the house remained in disarray from the break-in, but something else caught Lynn's attention. Muddy boot prints that hadn't been there when Noah described the scene. Someone had returned. Following the prints led her to Noah's bedroom. The boy's backpack was missing along with his jacket from the hook by the door. He'd been here and left in a hurry. A sound from outside, the crack of a branch breaking, sent Lynn into immediate defensive position. Through the window, she caught movement at the edge of the property where it bordered Blackstone land. Noah moving furtively through the trees, Lynn slipped out the back door, circling to intercept him. The boy nearly screamed when she grabbed his arm, pulling him behind a large oak. What the hell are you doing? She hissed. Getting proof. Noah's face was flushed with determination. I found Dad's old research. What research? He was a geologist before he got sick. Worked for the state environmental agency. He was investigating the mining operations. The boy pulled a weathered journal from his backpack. I remembered he kept this in his workshop. The men who broke in didn't find it. Lynn took the journal quickly, scanning its contents. Detailed notes about water testing, soil samples, photographs of dead wildlife. All centered around Blackstone's operations. Your father was building a case against Blackstone. Noah nodded grimly. And then he got that mysterious illness, the same one Mom has now. The implications settled heavily between them. We need to get this somewhere safe. Lynn decided, and you need to stay with your mother. Hey, but I can help. You've helped enough, Noah. This is dangerous. A new sound interrupted them, vehicles approaching the Thompson house. Back gate, Lynn whispered, guiding the boy through the property. My truck's parked half a mile down the service road. Go there and wait. What about you? I need to see who's interested in this place. After ensuring Noah was safely away, Lynn circled back, taking a position that offered visibility without exposure. 2 black SUVs had parked in front of the Thompson house. Men in tactical gear performed a methodical search of the property. Leading them was a tall, lean figure Lynn recognized immediately. Ethan Walsh, Blackstone's head of security. Former military intelligence rumored to have been discharged under questionable circumstances. His precision movements and calm demeanor made him more dangerous than a dozen hot-headed enforcers. She watched as Walsh directed his men with hand signals, then answered a phone call. Even from this distance, his posture changed during the conversation, standing straighter, more deferential, talking to the boss. When they departed empty-handed, Lynn waited an extra 30 minutes before retrieving her truck and Noah. We can't go back to daybreak, she told the boy. They'll be watching it. Where then? I know a place. The cabin belonged to Samuel's uncle, abandoned years ago, but still structurally sound. Located in a remote valley, it offered both concealment and defensive advantages. Stay here. Lynn instructed Noah after they'd secured the perimeter. I need to check on your mother and get supplies. Grace's clinic was busy when Lynn arrived. The doctor pulled her into a private exam room. Noah's safe, Lynn assured her before Grace could ask, but we have a bigger problem. Ben Thompson was investigating Blackstone before he died. I think his research is what they're after, and why they took the horses to flush me out, get me involved. Grace's usually calm expression faltered. Why would they care about you being involved? Because of what I might already know. Lynn hesitated. I need to tell you something about Samuel. She explained how Samuel, a veterinarian, had been treating animals from properties surrounding Blackstone's operations, how he'd noticed patterns of unusual illnesses, how he'd begun collecting samples, consulting with Ben Thompson about testing them. The night he died, he called me excited, said he and Ben had found something definitive, evidence that couldn't be ignored. Lynn's voice grew tight. He was driving to meet me when he had the accident. Grace absorbed this silently. Finally, she asked, why didn't you investigate then? I tried, but the evidence disappeared. Samuel's samples were missing from his truck. His notes gone from his office, and Ryan shut down every attempt I made to look deeper. The memory still burned. I was too deep in grief to fight effectively, so I walked away, told myself it was a tragic accident. And now I think I was wrong, and people are still getting sick because of it. Grace moved to a locked cabinet, retrieving a file. I've been tracking unusual symptoms in patients from certain areas. Elevated heavy metals liver function, abnormalities, rare cancers. She handed over the file, all clustered around Blackstone properties. Have you reported this? To every agency that would listen, the state investigated and found no conclusive evidence of correlation. The federal EPA said they'd follow up, but never did. Frustration colored her tone. Someone's blocking it at every level. The clinic's front door opened, bell chiming. Grace peered through the exam room blinds, then stepped back sharply. Sheriff Coulter. Lynn tensed. Is there another way out? Back door through the lab. Get Noah's mother somewhere safe. Don't tell me where, and Grace, be careful who you trust. Lynn slipped out as Coulter's voice echoed from the reception area, asking for Dr. Chen. Back at the cabin, she found Noah poring over his father's journal. Did you see Mom? Is she okay? She's fine, Doctor. Chen is making sure she gets somewhere safe. Lynn set down her bag of supplies. Now we need to figure out our next move. I think I found something. Noah pointed to a map in the journal. Dad marked these locations for water testing, but this one's circled differently. He indicated a spot near Blackstone's main mining operation, and there's a note, source confirmed, primary evidence secured. What date? 2 weeks before he got sick. Lynn studied the map. The location was remote, accessible only by unimproved roads or on horseback. He found the source of the contamination and evidence that would prove it. But where would he hide it? Somewhere he thought was safe. Lynn's mind worked through possibilities. Noah, did your father have a safety deposit box, a storage unit? The boy shook his head. Not that I know of. What about friends he trusted? Colleagues? Noah's expression changed. He and your husband were close. They went fishing together at Jensen's Creek. Dad called it their thinking spot, Jensen's Creek. The mountain stream where Samuel had proposed to her, where they'd spent countless peaceful afternoons, a location known to very few people. We need to go there. Tomorrow, first light. That night as Noah slept, Lynn kept watch from the cabin's porch. The valley lay silent under a blanket of stars, deceptively peaceful. She cleaned her weapon methodically, the familiar routine calming her thoughts. Samuel had been murdered. The certainty of it settled into her bones. Not a random accident, but a deliberate silencing. And the same people were still operating freely, still poisoning the land, still threatening anyone who might expose them. Her grief, which had become a dull ache over the past 2 years, flared into something sharper, more purposeful, rage tempered by discipline. Dawn found them hiking toward Jensen's Creek. The remote fishing spot required navigating unmarked trails through dense forest. Perfect for hiding secrets. Dad and Dr. Morgan had a special spot. Noah explained as they climbed, a flat rock overlooking the deepest pool. They said the trout there were smarter than most people. The fishing spot appeared unchanged since Lynn had last visited years ago. The large flat rock still overlooked a deep clear pool where trout darted through sunlit water. They used to hide their good whiskey under that rock ledge. Noah pointed, said it was their evidence safe as a joke. Lynn knelt by the ledge, reaching into the shadowed space beneath her fingers, found a metal box, weatherproofed and sealed. Inside lay a USB drive wrapped in waterproof material and a handwritten note in Ben Thompson's precise script. If you're reading this, something's happened. Water samples prove deliberate contamination from Mine Site 7. Chemical signature matches additive used only by Blackstone operations. Samuel has tissue samples from affected livestock, showing same signature evidence secured with him. Trust no one official in Logan County. Lynn handed the note to Noah, whose hands trembled as he read his father's last message. They killed him, the boy whispered, and Dr. Morgan. And they're still poisoning people. Lynn secured the USB drive. But now we have proof. As they turned to leave, a sound froze them both, breaking twigs, approaching footsteps. Multiple sets. Hide, Lynn, whispered, drawing her weapon. No matter what happens, stay hidden. Shepherdoi. Noah scrambled beneath a dense thicket of brush as Lynn positioned herself behind the large rock, sidearm ready. 3 men emerged into the clearing. Leading them was Ethan Walsh, his movements precise and controlled. Behind him, 2 armed security personnel scanned the area with practiced efficiency. Clear, sir, one reported. Walsh approached the fishing spot, studying the ground. His head tilted as he noticed disturbances in the soil where Lynn had knelt. Someone's been here recently. His voice carried the flat precision of a man accustomed to giving orders. Check under that ledge. One guard knelt, reaching into the space where Lynn had found the box. Empty, sir. Walsh's expression hardened, spread out. They can't be far. Lynn calculated angles, distances, odds. 3 armed men versus 1 with Noah's safety at stake, bad equation. Her decision was made for her when one guard moved toward Noah's hiding place. Lynn stepped out, weapon raised. That's far enough. Walsh turned slowly, unsurprised. Former Sheriff Morgan, I thought we might cross paths eventually. Call off your dogs, Walsh, or what you'll shoot 3 armed men. His smile never reached his eyes. Even Eagle Eye can't beat those odds. I don't need to beat all 3 of you, just you. Lynn kept her aim centered on his chest. The others can decide if they want to die for Blackstone's paycheck. A tense silence stretched between them. You have something that doesn't belong to you, Walsh said finally. Funny, I was about to say the same about my horses. The horses are leverage, nothing more. Return what you took, and this ends peacefully. We both know that's a lie, Lynn's voice remained steady. Blackstone's been poisoning this valley for years. Ben Thompson and my husband found proof. That's why they're dead. Something flickered across Walsh's face, surprise quickly masked. Samuel Morgan died in a car accident. Keep telling yourself that now. Back away, all of you. Walsh gave an almost imperceptible signal. Lynn recognized the move a half-second before his men reacted, diving sideways as gunfire erupted. 3 shots, 2 guards down, 1 with a shoulder wound, the other clutching his leg. Walsh himself had taken cover behind a tree. Impressive, he called, but futile. Blackstone owns this county. The mines employ half the population. No one will stand against him. I'm not looking for allies, Lynn replied coldly. Just justice. There's no justice for dead women. Walsh raised his own weapon. Only forgotten causes. The sound that saved her wasn't human. A piercing whistle from downstream. Then the thunder of hooves. Phantom burst into the clearing. Eyes wild, coat lathered with exertion. Behind him rode Noah, clinging to the stallion's mane. The distraction was enough. Walsh's shot went wide. Lynn's didn't. The security chief staggered, clutching his side where her bullet had grazed him. His men retreated, dragging their wounded leader. This isn't over, Walsh gasped as they disappeared into the trees. Lynn turned to Noah, in phantom shock, giving way to amazement. How? He found us. Noah explained, sliding from the stallion's back. Came crashing through the trees while you were confronting them. I remembered how you said he was special, trained differently. Lynn approached Phantom, slowly stroking his neck as he snorted and pawed the ground. Good boy, she whispered. How did you escape? The answer would have to wait. Walsh's men would regroup, return with reinforcements. We need to move. Lynn decided, now we have evidence and a witness to attempted murder. Time to take this beyond Logan County. As they prepared to leave, Lynn checked Walsh's wounded men hidden nearby. They'd survived but weren't going anywhere soon. She secured their weapons and phones. One phone contained recent text messages. Target acquired heading to old fishing spot. Evidence must be secured before federal involvement. Silence all witnesses per MB directive. And the most damning, Morgan accident file located Sheriff C will handle disposal. Lynn pocketed the phone, the final confirmation of what she'd already known in her heart. Samuel's death was no accident. Ryan Coulter knew it, and now she had proof as they mounted Phantom for the journey back, the powerful horse easily carrying both riders. Noah clutched his father's journal tightly. What happens now? He asked. Now we get this evidence somewhere safe. Lynn replied, and then we find the rest of my horses. They rode silently through the forest, pursued by shadows, both real and remembered. Behind them, the peaceful fishing spot that had held final secrets from two murdered men. Ahead, a confrontation years in the making. Lynn's hand rested on the USB drive in her pocket. Cold, small, seemingly insignificant, but powerful enough to bring down an empire built on poison and lies. The sun slipped toward the horizon as they emerged from the trees, the valley stretching before them. Somewhere out there, Maxwell Blackstone continued his operations, believing himself untouchable. He was wrong. From her saddlebag, Lynn retrieved an old jacket she'd found in Samuel's closet after his death. In its pocket, she discovered a folded piece of paper she hadn't noticed before. Opening it revealed a list of GPS coordinates and a single line, SM 2021, not an accident. The same phrase from the note left during the horse theft. Her blood ran cold as realization dawned. Someone from inside Blackstone's organization had orchestrated the horse theft, not to silence her, but to awaken her. To point her toward the truth, she had an ally she didn't know. Someone playing a dangerous double game. And the hunt was just beginning. The safe house was a weathered cabin 30 miles from Logan Valley, deep in national forest land. Built decades ago as a ranger station, it had been decommissioned and forgotten by all but a few. Samuel had purchased it through a shell company preparing a bolt hole neither of them had expected to need. Lynn secured the perimeter while Noah settled Phantom in a small corral behind the structure. The stallion remained agitated, sensing the tension in his humans. We should be safe here for a while. Lynn told the boy, no one knows about this place except me. What about my mom and Dr. Chen? I have a way to contact Grace securely. Lynn removed a satellite phone from beneath a floorboard. Your mother's being protected, but the less we know about where the safer for everyone. The call connected after 3 attempts. Grace, it's me. Are you secure? Yes. The doctor's voice was tense. Lynn, things are escalating. Sheriff Coulter's deputies are searching for you and Noah. They're saying you kidnapped the boy. That doesn't surprise me. Where's Noah's mother? Safe. I called in a favor with colleagues in Missoula. She's receiving treatment at their facility under a different name. Good, listen carefully. We found evidence at Jensen's Creek. Ben Thompson left a USB drive with proof of deliberate contamination from Blackstone's mines. He and Samuel were building a case. Silence then. That explains why Samuel was so secretive those last few weeks. Grace, I need you to contact Agent Rivera at the FBI. Tell him what we found. The evidence needs to reach federal authorities before Blackstone's people can intercept it. I'll try, but communications are being monitored. Blackstone's security team has established checkpoints on major roads leading out of the county. They're claiming it's due to terrorist threats against mining operations. Lynn absorbed this grimly. They're closing the net. How long before the FBI team arrives? That's the other problem. Agent Rivera said the nearest field office is dealing with a major situation in Billings. It could be another 36 hours before they can dispatch anyone. Too long. Walsh wouldn't wait. His wounded pride would accelerate their timeline. We need another way to get this evidence out, Lynn thought rapidly. The old fire tower on Mason Ridge. It has an emergency radio system that broadcasts on federal frequencies. If we can reach it, we can contact authorities directly. That's at least a day's journey by horseback through rough country. Exactly why they won't expect it. Lynn kept her voice steady. Keep trying to reach Rivera, and Grace, watch your back. If they're willing to kill for this secret, no one connected is safe. After ending the call, Lynn found Noah examining his father's journal by lantern light. "Ms. Morgan, look at this." He pointed to a page of chemical formulas. Dad highlighted this compound repeatedly, said it was the smoking gun. Lynn studied the notation. Chemical formulas weren't her expertise, but the boy's excitement was clear. "What is it?" "A proprietary chemical used in Blackstone's fracking operations. Dad wrote that it's not on any approved list for mining applications. They're using it illegally. And it's in the water samples." Noah nodded grimly. "In concentrations 100 times above any safe level, it causes liver damage, neurological problems." The symptoms mirrored those affecting his mother and others in the community. Anger flashed across the boy's young face. "They're killing people for profit and getting away with it." Lynn placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not anymore." "Sure." They spent the night planning their route to Mason Ridge. The fire tower stood on federal land beyond Blackstone's influence, but reaching it meant traversing difficult terrain. With roads blocked, they'd need to travel cross-country. Phantom could carry them both for stretches, but the journey would still take most of a day. Dawn brought an unexpected discovery. While checking the cabin's surroundings, Lynn found fresh horse droppings near the tree line. "We have company," she told Noah, drawing her weapon. "Blackstone's men. Maybe." She studied the ground. One rider approached from the east, circled the property, then withdrew the same way. Noah looked frightened. "How did they find us?" "That's what worries me." Lynn scanned the perimeter again. "We need to move, now." They packed quickly, loading essentials onto Phantom. The stallions seemed to understand the urgency, standing calmly as they worked. A twig snapped in the forest. Lynn spun, weapon raised. "Don't shoot," called a familiar voice. "It's me." Grace Chen emerged from the trees, leading a chestnut mare. Her normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, her expression grim. "What are you doing here?" Lynn demanded, lowering her gun. "Bringing news and a warning." Grace dismounted stiffly, unused to riding. "Coulter's deputized Blackstone's security team. They're conducting emergency searches throughout the county. The story they're telling is that you've had a psychological break, that grief over Samuel finally made you snap. And people believe that. Fear makes people believe convenient lies." Grace's expression was bitter. "Especially when their paychecks depend on it." "How did you find us?" "Samuel told me about this place years ago. Made me memorize the coordinates in case of emergency." Grace met Lynn's gaze. "He trusted me." Lynn processed this revelation. Samuel had shared their emergency location without telling her. "Why, there's more." Grace continued. "I managed to access your husband's autopsy report through medical channels, Lynn. There were anomalies that weren't in the official report. Bruising patterns inconsistent with a car accident, evidence of impact before the crash." The confirmation of what Lynn had suspected hit like a physical blow. "Someone ran him off the road." Grace nodded grimly. "And the toxicology screen showed the same chemical compounds we're finding in patients from around the mines Samuel had been exposed. Repeatedly. He was testing the samples himself." Lynn's voice tightened, exposing himself to prove the connection. Noah, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "My dad, too. He was already sick when he died. Mom said the doctors couldn't explain it." The three stood in somber silence, absorbing the weight of these revelations. "We need to get to Mason Ridge," Lynn said finally. "With 2 horses, we can make better time." "There's a problem." Grace pulled out her phone, showing a news alert. "Blackstone Mining has announced an emergency evacuation of all operations due to terrorist threats. They're clearing a 5-mile radius around their main facility. Mason Ridge is within that zone." Lynn realized they're blocking our access to the radio tower. It gets worse. The evacuation creates a legitimate reason for heightened security roadblocks. Even military assistance, Blackstone's essentially created a quarantine zone he completely controls. Lynn's mind raced through implications. They're desperate, which means we're close to something they can't afford to have exposed. The primary contamination source, Noah suggested, pointing to his father's journal. Site 7, Dad said that's where the evidence is strongest. Kuni, where exactly is Site 7? Lynn asked Noah, opened the journal to a hand-drawn map. Here it's a drainage point where three mines converge. Dad wrote that they're dumping untreated waste directly into the groundwater. Lynn studied the location. That's within the evacuation zone. Heavily guarded, I'm sure. But if we could get samples from there, Grace interjected, combined with Ben's research and the tissue samples Samuel collected, we'd have irrefutable evidence. So, Lynn nodded slowly. Evidence worth killing for. A new plan formed riskier, but potentially more effective than simply broadcasting what they already had. Get to Site 7, collect fresh samples. Document the illegal dumping operation directly. I'm coming with you, Grace declared, before Lynn could suggest otherwise. I'm the only one who can properly collect and preserve the samples. Lynn wanted to argue, but recognized the truth in her words. Noah stays somewhere safe. No way, the boy protested. That's my dad's research I'm seeing this through. It's too dangerous. They killed my father? Noah interrupted, his young face hardened with determination. Poisoned my mother. I've earned the right to see justice done. The conviction in his voice silenced her objections. She recognized the same stubborn resolve that had driven her through her own darkest moments. Fine, but you follow orders exactly. No heroics. Aho, they spent the afternoon planning their approach. The evacuation created both problems and opportunities. Security would be heightened, but the chaos of moving personnel might create gaps in coverage. We'll need a diversion. Lynn decided something to draw attention away from Site 7. Grace smiled thinly. I might have just the thing. From her medical bag, she produced several vials. Hydrogen sulfide combined with a few other compounds creates an impressive smoke cloud with a terrible smell. Non-toxic, but convincing enough to trigger emergency protocols. Where did you get that? I have patients with unusual needs. Sometimes traditional medicine isn't enough. Grace's expression remained neutral. Sometimes you need to work outside the system. Lynn reassessed her friend, wondering what other secrets the respected doctor might be keeping. As night fell, they finalized their plan. They would approach Site 7 before dawn, when shift changes and human fatigue created maximum vulnerability. Grace's chemical diversion would draw security to the opposite side of the facility. Lynn and Noah would document the dumping operation, while Grace collected samples. We'll need to move fast. Lynn warned 20 minutes maximum before they realize it's a diversion. 20 minutes is all I need, Grace assured her. They slept in shifts too tense for deep rest. Lynn took the first watch, her mind churning through contingencies, weak points in their plan. The stakes had never been higher, not just for justice for Samuel and Ben, but for an entire community being slowly poisoned. During her watch, Lynn examined the USB drive from Jensen's Creek more carefully. It contained detailed water and soil analysis photographs of deformed wildlife. Internal Blackstone documents about chemical usage. Ben Thompson had been thorough, methodical in building his case. But the most damning file was a video Samuel speaking directly to the camera 2 days before his death. If you're watching this, something's happened to me. The samples confirm our worst fears. Blackstone mining is deliberately contaminating groundwater with illegal chemical compounds. The contamination isn't accidental, it's a cost-saving measure. Treating these chemicals properly would reduce profits by millions. Instead, they're dumping them directly into our water table. He held up a vial of clear liquid. This water sample from Site 7 contains concentrations that will cause irreversible health damage. People are already sick. Some will die. Ben and I have compiled evidence that can't be ignored or dismissed. We're taking it to federal authorities tomorrow. Samuel's face grew somber. If something prevents that from happening, this video serves as my sworn testimony. Maxwell Blackstone is knowingly poisoning this community, and Sheriff Ryan Coulter is helping cover it up. Lynn watched the video twice, each viewing adding fuel to the cold fire building inside her. Samuel's voice, his earnest determination to expose the truth, his unwavering courage, all extinguished by corporate greed. When Grace took over watch, Lynn tried to sleep, but found only fragmented, troubled dreams. Samuel calling her name, horses running through darkness, a shadowy figure watching from trees. She woke before dawn, alert despite the lack of rest, Years of law enforcement had trained her body to function on adrenaline when necessary. They moved out silently, abandoning the cabin that was no longer secure. Phantom carried Noah while Lynn rode Grace's borrowed mare. They traveled cross-country, avoiding roads and open spaces where they might be spotted. The evacuation zone around Blackstone's operations loomed ahead, marked by hastily erected barriers and security checkpoints. From their vantage point on a wooded hillside, they observed vehicles moving in and out, workers being escorted from the area, security personnel establishing perimeters. "They're really selling the terrorist threat angle," Grace observed. "Creating an official emergency gives them tremendous power to control access and information, and destroy evidence while everyone's distracted." Lynn added, "They circled wide, approaching Site 7 from the densely forested eastern boundary where the terrain was too rough for vehicles. Leaving the horses secured in a hidden gully, they proceeded on foot. Site 7 proved to be a nondescript drainage area where several mining operations converged. Large pipes emptied into a collection pond that then fed into a natural stream. The water ran an unnatural bluish gray. "That should be clear mountain runoff," Noah whispered, horrified. From their concealed position, they observed two guards patrolling the perimeter. Another manned a small monitoring station near the largest drainage pipe. "Limited security," Lynn noted. "They're not expecting trouble here. Most resources would be directed to protect personnel and equipment during evacuation." Grace agreed. Not an obscure drainage site. They reviewed their plan one final time. Grace would create her diversion half a mile north, where it would be visible to the main mining complex. Once security responded, Lynn and Noah would document the illegal dumping, while Grace collected samples from the contaminated stream. "Ready?" Lynn asked, both nodded, faces tense but determined. Grace disappeared into the forest, moving with surprising stealth for someone with no tactical training. Lynn and Noah waited, watching the guards through binoculars. 15 minutes later, an alarm blared from the main complex. Thick yellow-tinged smoke rose above the tree line to the north. Radio chatter erupted among the guards. "Chemical leak at the North Processing Plant. All available personnel respond." Two of the three guards immediately headed toward the emergency, leaving only the monitoring station attendant. "Now," Lynn whispered. They moved quickly through the underbrush. Noah carried his father's digital camera with telephoto lens, documenting the drainage pipes, collection pond, and monitoring equipment. Lynn approached the remaining guard from behind, subduing him with practiced efficiency. She secured him with zip ties and duct tape, hiding him in the monitoring station. A quick check of the station's equipment revealed exactly what they'd suspected: instruments measuring chemical content in the water, all connected to a system that falsified readings before transmitting them to regulatory monitoring systems. "It's all automated," Lynn realized. The actual contamination levels never reach official records. Noah photographed the equipment, while Lynn downloaded data from the monitoring computer onto a thumb drive. Meanwhile, Grace appeared at the stream, methodically collecting water samples in sterile containers. "This is worse than we thought," she called quietly. "These concentrations would cause immediate cellular damage on contact." The security radio crackled with updates about the chemical leak to the north. They had perhaps 5 more minutes before someone realized it was a diversion. Noah continued photographing, moving closer to the large drainage pipe for better angles. Lynn was about to call him back when she noticed something odd: a secondary pipe, smaller and partially hidden by vegetation, emptying directly into the stream beyond the monitoring equipment. "Grace," she called softly, "check that smaller output." The doctor collected samples from the second pipe, her expression growing increasingly alarmed. "This is pure toxic waste, no treatment whatsoever." Lynn documented the hidden pipe while Noah continued photographing the main drainage system. Their evidence was mounting rapidly: falsified monitoring, hidden discharge pipes, untreated chemical waste. "1 minute and we're out," Lynn warned. Grace sealed her last sample container when the radio erupted with new orders. "All units, the north sector is a diversion. Return to monitoring stations immediately. Repeat, return to stations." "Time's up," Lynn announced. "Move." They retreated into the forest as engines roared in the distance, security vehicles returning at high speed. "Did we get enough?" Noah asked as they ran. "More than enough," Grace confirmed protecting her sample case. They had nearly reached their horses when the sound of approaching ATVs cut through the forest. Security teams searching the perimeter. They know someone was here. Lynn warned they'll find our trail. Split up. Grace suggested Lynn considered their options. No, we stay together, but we need to mislead them about our direction. She quickly crafted a false trail leading west while they actually headed east, an old tracker's trick but effective against pursuers relying on vehicles rather than woodcraft. They mounted and rode deeper into national forest land, following game trails too narrow for motorized vehicles. The sounds of pursuit gradually faded behind them. We did it, Noah exulted quietly once they'd put several miles between themselves and Site 7. We got the evidence. And getting it was the easy part. Lynn cautioned, now we need to deliver it safely. They rode until midday, stopping in a secluded valley to rest the horses and review their findings. Grace's sample case contained irrefutable physical evidence of contamination. Noah's camera held dozens of high-resolution photographs documenting the entire operation. And Lynn's thumb drive contained the monitoring station's actual data showing true contamination levels. Combined with Ben's research and Samuel's testimony, this is enough for federal charges. Grace confirmed environmental crimes fraud conspiracy, possibly even murder, if we can connect the contamination directly to deaths. We still need to get it to the FBI, Lynn reminded them, and Blackstone controls every road out of the county. Maybe not every road. Noah opened his father's journal to a detailed topographical map. Dad marked these old logging roads. They cross into Jefferson County through national forest land. No checkpoints because they're supposedly impassable. Impassable for vehicles. Lynn noted, not for horses. The route would add hours to their journey but offered their best chance of avoiding Blackstone's security net. They set out immediately aware that every passing minute increased the risk of discovery. The old logging roads had deteriorated over decades of neglect. Washouts, fallen trees, and overgrown sections slowed their progress. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered overhead, promising weather that would further complicate their journey. We need to find shelter before that hits, Lynn decided, studying the darkening sky. Noah consulted his father's map. There's an old fire service cabin about 3 miles ahead. Dad marked it as structurally sound. Certainly, the cabin was little more than a weathered shelter with a partially collapsed roof, but it offered protection from the approaching storm. They secured the horses beneath a lean-to and moved their critical evidence inside. Rain began as they settled in, quickly intensifying to a downpour that drummed against the remaining roof. The temperature dropped sharply. How much farther to Jefferson County? Grace asked, wrapping herself in an emergency blanket from her medical kit. About 15 miles, Noah answered, studying the map by flashlight. But the worst terrain is behind us. Lynn kept watch by the single grimy window, unease prickling her skin. The storm provided cover, but also limited visibility and masked sounds of potential pursuit. As night fell, they ate cold rations and discussed their next steps. Once across the county line, they would need to reach the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, which had no connections to Blackstone. From there, federal authorities could be contacted safely. I know Sheriff Wilson in Jefferson. Grace mentioned she's incorruptible former military. If we can reach her, she'll help. Lynn nodded, still watching the darkness outside. The rain had slackened somewhat, allowing better visibility. Nothing moved in the forest beyond. We should rest while we can, she suggested. Leave before first light. They arranged sleeping positions, with Lynn taking first watch. The long day had exhausted Noah, who fell asleep almost immediately. Grace checked her sample case one final time before settling against the wall. You know this won't end with just evidence, don't you? The doctor said quietly. Blackstone won't go down without a fight, and he has resources we can't imagine. I know, Lynn's expression hardened in the dim light, but so do I. 2 hours into her watch, Lynn detected movement in the forest, a shadow detaching from shadows, then another, moving with tactical precision toward the cabin. Wake up, she hissed. We've got company. Grace and Noah were instantly alert, gathering their belongings silently. Back door, Lynn directed, drawing her weapon. The cabin's rear exit opened onto dense forest that sloped down toward a creek swollen by the recent rain. Not an ideal escape route, but their only option with the front apparently compromised. They had just reached the door when a voice called from outside, "Lynn Morgan, this is Sheriff Coulter. We know you're in there. Come out peacefully with the boy and no one needs to get hurt." Anger flashed through Lynn at Ryan's betrayal. Once her friend, her colleague, now a corrupt officer protecting poisoners and murderers. "Go," she whispered to Grace and Noah. "Follow the creek downstream. I'll catch up." "You can't face them alone," Grace protested. "I'm not planning to, just creating a diversion." Lynn's smile was cold in the darkness. "Something I learned from you." After ensuring they were moving toward the creek, Lynn called back to Coulter. "Ryan, since when do legitimate law enforcement operations involve sneaking around in the middle of the night? You've kidnapped a minor, Lynn, interfered with an official evacuation, trespassed on private property. Come out now and we can resolve this reasonably." "How reasonable? Like Samuel's accident? Like the poison Blackstone's dumping in our water?" Silence followed her accusation. Then, "You're not thinking clearly. Grief has affected your judgment. Let me help you." Lynn moved carefully around the cabin's interior, placing items to make it appear the space was still occupied. "Help me like you helped Blackstone cover up murder. I know everything, Ryan. I have proof." Another pause. "Whatever you think you have won't matter if you don't survive to present it." The threat hung in the rain-soaked air. Lynn completed her preparations, then slipped toward the rear door. "You've got 1 minute to come out, Lynn. Then we're coming in." She exited silently, staying low and using the cabin for cover as she circled toward the horses. In the darkness, she could make out at least 6 figures surrounding the structure. Too many for a standard police operation. Blackstone's men, not legitimate law enforcement. Reaching the lean-to, she freed the horses, guiding Phantom toward the creek, while allowing the mare to bolt in the opposite direction. The distraction worked as planned. Shouts erupted as the loose horse crashed through the perimeter. Gunfire followed, then confused orders as the team realized they were shooting at a horse. Not a human target, Lynn mounted Phantom and rode swiftly downstream, catching up to Grace and Noah within minutes. The boy clung to a fallen log while Grace helped steady him against the current. "Mount up," Lynn ordered, helping them onto Phantom's back. "They'll realize the deception any second." The powerful stallion carried all 3 riders, struggling against the muddy terrain. Behind them, angry shouts confirmed their ruse had been discovered. "They'll track us," Grace warned as they pushed forward. "Not in this." Lynn guided Phantom into the creek itself, using the water to mask their trail. And not at night. They traveled for hours through rain and darkness, the creek eventually leading them to a wider stream that marked the county boundary. Crossing into Jefferson County provided immediate psychological relief, though they knew the legal boundary wouldn't stop determined pursuers. By dawn, they'd reached a small ranching community where Grace had once treated patients. The doctor led them to a weathered farmhouse set back from the main road. "Martha Kingsley," she explained, 78 years old and tougher than anyone I know. Her husband was killed in a mining accident 30 years ago. She has no love for Blackstone." Mining. The elderly woman who answered their knock took in their bedraggled appearance without comment. Her sharp eyes assessed each face before settling on Grace. "Dr. Chen, unusual hour for a house call." "We need help, Martha, and discretion." The woman stepped aside, allowing them entry. "Discretion's been my specialty since before you were born." Inside, Martha provided dry clothes, hot food, and a secure place to store their evidence. She listened silently as they explained the situation, her weathered face growing increasingly grim. "Doesn't surprise me one bit," she said when they'd finished. "Blackstone Mining killed my Harold with their shortcuts. Claimed it was his error, but I knew better. Never could prove it, though." "I think we can prove what they're doing now," Lynn told her. "But we need to reach Sheriff Wilson." Martha's telephone was an old landline, unlikely to be monitored. Grace placed the call, her medical credentials ensuring immediate connection to the sheriff. "Lisa Grace Chen, I need your help. It's an emergency involving Blackstone Mining and Logan County Sheriff's Department." The conversation was brief, direct. Sheriff Wilson agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a diner at the county's main crossroads. "She'll bring a federal contact who's already been investigating Blackstone's operations," Grace reported after hanging up. Martha insisted they rest before the meeting. "You're no good to anyone exhausted. I'll keep watch." Despite her age, the determination in her voice brooked no argument. She positioned herself by the window with a shotgun across her lap, a silent sentinel as they caught a few hours of desperately needed sleep. The diner meeting was set for noon. Leaving their evidence securely hidden with Martha, they borrowed her ancient truck and drove to the rendezvous. Lean insisted they arrive early to survey the location for potential threats. Sheriff Lisa Wilson was a tall, angular woman with short iron gray hair and the ramrod posture of her military background. She entered the diner alone, scanning faces until she located Grace. "Doc," she acknowledged, sliding into the booth. "Interesting morning. Got a call from Ryan Coulter about fugitives crossing into my jurisdiction. Sounded mighty concerned about a kidnapped boy." Noah bristled. "I wasn't kidnapped. These people are trying to get justice for my father." Wilson studied him thoughtfully. "You must be Ben Thompson's son. Your dad and I served together before I went into law enforcement." "Good man." Lynn watched the sheriff carefully evaluating trustworthiness. "We have evidence that Blackstone Mining is deliberately contaminating groundwater, evidence that cost my husband and Ben Thompson their lives." Wilson's expression remained neutral. "Serious accusations. Where's this evidence now?" "Somewhere safe," Grace answered. "We needed to assess the situation first." "Smart." Wilson nodded approvingly. "Because Coulter's got roadblocks on every major artery into Jefferson County. Claims he's pursuing dangerous eco-terrorists who sabotage mining operations." The fabricated narrative didn't surprise Lynn. Standard procedure control, the story control the response. "I've got no love for Coulter," Wilson stated flatly. "Man's been sliding for years, but I need solid justification to block another sheriff's legitimate manhunt." "We can provide that justification," Lynn assured her. "But first, where's the federal contact you mentioned? Delayed some bureaucratic holdup." Wilson checked her watch. "Should be here within the hour." They ordered coffee, maintaining casual appearances, while Wilson explained the political realities they faced. Blackstone's tentacles reached deep state officials, judges, business leaders, all dependent on mining operations for economic stability. Even with solid evidence, we're facing an uphill battle. "People are dying," Noah interjected, his young voice cracking with emotion. "My mom is sick because of them. How many others have to suffer before someone does something?" Wilson regarded him soberly. "That's the question that's haunted this region for generations, son." The diner's door opened, admitting a tall man in a dark suit. Wilson tensed slightly. "Federal contacts early," she murmured. The man approached their booth, his bearing distinctly official. "Sheriff Wilson, Dr. Chen, Free Agent Rivera," Grace acknowledged. "Thank you for coming." Lynn studied the newcomer intently. Something about him felt wrong. Too polished, too precise. "You have evidence regarding Blackstone mining operations?" he inquired directly. "We do," Grace confirmed. "Environmental crimes on a massive scale. Deliberate contamination of groundwater with illegal chemicals." Rivera nodded. "I'll need to see this evidence immediately. The Bureau has been building a case against Blackstone for months." Warning bells sounded in Lynn's mind. The timing was too convenient, the agent too eager. "Your credentials, please," she requested calmly. Rivera produced an FBI identification with practiced smoothness. Everything appeared legitimate, but Lynn's instincts continued screaming caution. "You mentioned the Bureau's ongoing case." She pressed, "Who's the lead investigator?" "That would be confidential information, Miss Morgan." "Not to someone already involved in the investigation, which I am, according to the real Agent Rivera, whom I spoke with by phone." A fractional hesitation crossed the man's face, so brief anyone else might have missed it. But Lynn didn't miss details. It was what had made her legendary Sheriff Wilson sense the shift, her hand moving subtly toward her sidearm. "Something you want to tell us, sir?" The false agent's expression hardened. "I represent interested parties who can ensure your evidence receives proper attention." Blackstone, Lynn stated flatly. "Mr. Blackstone prefers resolution without unnecessary complications. The evidence you've gathered in exchange for your safety and certain financial considerations." "You're offering a bribe," Wilson said incredulously. "In front of a sheriff, I'm offering a pragmatic solution." The man corrected, Blackstone mining employs thousands, supports entire communities. Balance that against abstract environmental concerns. Abstract? Noah's voice shook with rage. My mother can barely walk because of their abstract pollution? The man ignored him, focusing on Lynn. You're intelligent, Ms. Morgan. You understand how power works in places like this. Whatever evidence you have will be buried in years of litigation while Blackstone continues operations, or you can secure your future today. Lynn met his gaze steadily. Tell your boss I declined his offer, and that Samuel's evidence is already en route to multiple federal agencies. Killing me won't stop what's coming. The man's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. That's unfortunate. He rose smoothly, straightening his suit. Sheriff Wilson, you might want to reconsider your position in this matter. Professional courtesy. Only courtesy you'll get from me is not arresting you for impersonating a federal officer. Wilson's hand now rested openly on her weapon. Leave my county now. After the man departed, Wilson immediately pulled out her phone. I'm calling in deputies to secure this location and the real FBI contact. Don't bother, Lynn said, watching through the window as the false agent drove away. He's reporting back to Blackstone. Within an hour, they'll have people watching every road, every building in town. What now? Grace asked. We need to move the evidence immediately. Lynn's mind worked through options, and we need to understand why they're so desperate to suppress it. Sheriff Wilson provided a secure vehicle to return to Martha's farm. The elderly woman greeted them with characteristic bluntness. 3 men came asking questions about strangers in the area, claimed to be insurance investigators, had city shoes and government haircuts. Did they see anything? Lynn asked tensely. Do I look senile to you? Sent them chasing shadows toward the interstate? Martha sniffed disapprovingly. Your evidence is safe, added a little something to it too. She produced a yellowed file folder. Harold's accident investigation. Mining inspector noted substandard support structures, but the report was altered before official filing. Kept the original all these years, waiting for someone who could use it. The documentation showed a pattern stretching back decades. Systematic safety violations, falsified reports, suppressed evidence. Combined with their new findings, it painted a damning picture of corporate malfeasance, spanning generations. This is bigger than we realize, Lynn observed, not just current contamination, but a historical pattern of disregard for human life. Sheriff Wilson examined the combined evidence grimly. Enough for federal charges, but we still need to get it to legitimate authorities. And quickly, Grace added. Blackstone's people are closing in. Lynn considered their options. We need multiple copies, different routes. Make it impossible to intercept all of them. Wilson nodded approvingly. I've got 3 deputies I trust absolutely. They can take different routes to federal offices in Helena, Missoula, and Billings. What about digital copies? Noah suggested. We could upload everything to secure servers. Too risky from here. Wilson cautioned all regional internet traffic routes through systems Blackstone could potentially monitor or block. They spent the next hour preparing evidence packages, each containing physical samples, documentation, and digital copies. Sheriff Wilson dispatched her trusted deputies with strict instructions to avoid main roads and remain in constant communication. Now we wait, the sheriff declared after the last deputy departed. My office will provide protection until federal authorities arrive. Lynn shook her head. They'll be watching your office. We need somewhere less obvious. My cabin. Martha offered 10 miles into the national forest. No road access for the last 3 miles. Harold built it to last. The location was perfect, remote, defensible, unknown to outsiders. They prepared to leave immediately, aware that Blackstone's resources were being mobilized against them. As they loaded Martha's truck, a familiar engine sound approached Ryan Coulter's distinctive police cruiser, moving slowly down the rural road. Inside, Wilson ordered quietly, "Let me handle this." They retreated into the house as Wilson stepped onto the porch, her stance casual but ready. The cruiser stopped at the end of the driveway, and Ryan Coulter emerged alone. Through the window, Lynn watched her former friend and colleague approach. His movements seemed tired, his shoulders slightly bowed beneath the weight of his uniform. "Lisa," he greeted Wilson with a nod. "Thought we might have a chat." About what, Ryan, your illegal roadblocks in my county, your manhunt for a boy who isn't kidnapped, or maybe about how you're acting as Blackstone's personal security force? Coulter's expression tightened. You don't understand the situation. Enlighten me. Is Lynn Morgan here? He asked instead. Why would she be? Don't play games, Lisa. This is serious. So I gather, serious enough for fake FBI agents, serious enough to threaten a sitting sheriff? Coulter's eyes widened slightly. What are you talking about? Wilson studied him carefully. You really don't know. Interesting. Inside, Lynn made a decision. She stepped onto the porch facing the man who had once been her trusted colleague. Hello, Ryan. Coulter's expression cycled through surprise, relief, and wariness. Lynn, Jesus, you've caused a mess. The mess was already there. I'm just exposing it. You need to come back with me. Bring whatever evidence you think you have. We can resolve this properly. Like you resolved Samuel's accident. The words emerged sharper than she intended. Pain flashed across Coulter's features. I didn't know what would happen. The partial admission hung in the air between them. What did you think would happen when you told Blackstone that Samuel and Ben had evidence of illegal dumping? Lynn asked, her voice dangerously quiet. What did you think they'd do? They said they just wanted to talk to him. Review the findings before they went public. Protect jobs while addressing any legitimate concerns. Coulter's voice held genuine anguish. I never thought they'd, I swear to God, Lynn. But they did, and afterward you helped cover it up. Sheriff Wilson watched this exchange silently, her hand remaining near her weapon. I was already in too deep. Coulter admitted Blackstone had evidence of me taking money to overlook violations. Small stuff at first, then bigger things. Before I knew it, I couldn't get out. There's always a way out, Ryan. You just chose the easy one instead of the right one. His gaze dropped. Maxwell Blackstone sent me to bring you in. Said to tell you he has the rest of your horses. That they'll be released unharmed if you surrender the evidence and yourself, Lynn, absorb this new information. My horses for my silence. Classic hostage negotiation. It's a genuine offer, no charges, financial security. Just walk away from this crusade. And the people being poisoned, the ones already sick and dying, what do they get? Coulter had no answer. Tell Blackstone I decline. Again, he won't stop, Lynn. The evidence you have threatens everything he's built. Good. Coulter's radio crackled with a transmission. Sheriff, we've got the perimeter established, awaiting your signal. The betrayal registered instantly. Coulter hadn't come alone. He'd brought backup, was stalling while they surrounded the property. Sheriff Wilson drew her weapon in one smooth motion, inside Lynn. Now but Lynn remained focused on Coulter, searching his face for any remnant of the honorable man she'd once known. You don't have to be this person, Ryan. It's not too late to make the right choice. A flicker of something, regret, shame, perhaps even resolution, crossed his weathered features. He glanced at his radio, then back at Lynn. You always saw the best in people, he said quietly, even when they didn't deserve it. In one swift motion, Coulter pulled out his service weapon, but instead of aiming it, he placed it on the porch railing, sliding it toward Wilson. Southeast corner has the thinnest coverage, he said, his voice barely audible. Two men both focusing on the road. You've got maybe 3 minutes before they realize I'm taking too long. Lynn stared at her former friend, understanding, dawning Ryan. Just go. He stepped back, hands slightly raised. I'll tell them you were already gone when I arrived. Won't buy you much time, but it's something. Sheriff Wilson scooped up Coulter's weapon, her own still trained on him. Why the sudden change of heart? Not sudden. Coulter's smile was bitter. Just finally found the courage to act on it. Tell your deputies to hurry with that evidence. Blackstone's got people at every federal office within 200 miles. Lynn hesitated only a moment before nodding to Wilson. The sheriff disappeared inside to mobilize the others, while Lynn maintained visual contact with Coulter. This doesn't erase what happened to Samuel. She told him, nothing ever will. But maybe it helps the living. He started backing toward his cruiser. Go, Lynn, I'll buy you what time I can. Within minutes, they had loaded into Martha's truck and Martha's neighbor's SUV that Wilson had borrowed earlier. The elderly woman directed them toward a concealed trail behind her barn, a route invisible from the main road. As they bounced along the rough path, Lynn glanced back to see Coulter returning to his vehicle radio in hand. Whatever happened next, he had made his choice at last. She hoped it wouldn't be his final one. "Can we trust him?" Grace asked from beside her. "Not entirely," Lynn admitted, "but his guilt is genuine, and sometimes that's enough to change a man's course." The forest trail narrowed, forcing them to proceed in single file. Martha leading in her truck with Noah beside her, followed by Grace and Lynn in the SUV with Sheriff Wilson bringing up the rear. They had traveled perhaps 2 miles when the radio Wilson had brought crackled to life. All unit suspects fleeing on Forest Trail behind Kingsley property converge and intercept. "That answers the trust question," Wilson commented grimly. "He didn't hold out long, or they didn't give him a choice." Lynn countered, remembering the conflict in Coulter's eyes. Either way, their escape route was compromised. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew, engines revving, breaking branches, men shouting coordinates. "Martha," Wilson called forward, "alternatives." The elderly woman didn't slow. "Old mining trail branches, left in half a mile, leads to the high country, too steep for vehicles." "They'll follow on foot," Lynn pointed out. "Let them try." Martha's voice carried surprising steel. "Harold didn't just build our cabin. He mined these hills for 30 years. Know every trap and deadfall." The branching trail appeared suddenly little more than a game path, cutting sharply upward into densely forested hills. Martha navigated the turn with surprising skill for her age, the truck's ancient transmission grinding in protest. "Abandon the vehicles at the next clearing," she instructed through the open window. "Continue on foot. Less noise, better concealment." 5 minutes later, they reached a small meadow where Martha stopped. "From here, we walk cabins 3 miles north. Follow the ridge, not the valleys." They gathered essential supplies, evidence, weapons, water, medical kit, leaving the vehicles positioned to suggest they'd continued along the main trail. "They'll figure it out eventually," Wilson noted. "By then, we'll be long gone," Martha assured her. The old woman set a punishing pace despite her age, leading them along ridge trails invisible to untrained eyes. Behind them, vehicle sounds faded, replaced by more distant shouts as their pursuers discovered the abandoned trucks. "They're spreading out to search," Wilson observed, listening carefully. "Professional trackers by the sound of it. Blackstone's security team." Lynn agreed. "Former military, most likely. They don't know these hills," Martha said dismissively. "Harold and I spent 50 years walking these ridges, logged every game trail, every spring, every cave system." Her confidence proved warranted. Twice she led them through passages that doubled back, creating circular trails that would confuse pursuers. A third time she guided them across a shallow stream, using the water to mask their tracks. By late afternoon, they had reached higher elevations, where the terrain grew increasingly rugged. Martha pointed to a distant ridge where weathered wood was barely visible among the trees. Cabins just beyond that saddle. Almost there. As they crested the final ridge, Lynn felt the hairs on her neck rise. Something was wrong. The cabin looked undisturbed, but a subtle detail caught her attention. A broken branch near the path, freshly snapped. "Wait," she whispered, halting the group. "Someone's been here." Sheriff Wilson drew her sidearm, scanning the surroundings. Martha frowned, studying the cabin. She knew intimately. "Woodpile's been disturbed," the older woman noted. "Someone's inside." They retreated to a concealed position, evaluating options. Night would fall, soon bringing both protection and vulnerability. Without shelter, the mountain temperatures would become dangerous, especially for Noah and Martha. "Could be hunters," Grace suggested hopefully, using it for temporary shelter. "In an evacuation zone," Wilson shook her head. "Not likely." Lynn surveyed the cabin and surrounding area methodically. No vehicles visible, no smoke from the chimney. If someone was inside, they were being careful not to advertise their presence. "I'll approach alone," she decided, "reconnaissance only. If it's Blackstone's people, I'll fall back without engaging." Despite protests, particularly from Noah, Lynn's logic prevailed. One person had better odds of approaching undetected than 5. Wilson would provide cover from the ridge with her rifle, while the others remained concealed. Lynn moved silently through the forest using every scrap of cover. The terrain had natural surveillance advantages. Anyone inside the cabin would have limited visibility of the approaches, especially from the northern side where the trees grew closest. Reaching the cabin's outer wall, she listened intently. No voices, no movement, just the settling sounds of an old wooden structure. She edged toward a window staying below the sill. Slowly, she raised her head just enough to peer inside. The cabin's main room appeared empty. A table, chairs, stone fireplace. No obvious signs of occupation except a backpack leaning against the far wall. Expensive tactical design, not a hunter's gear. Movement from the small adjoining room caught her attention, a shadow shifting. Someone inside moving quietly. Lynn eased back from the window, preparing to retreat when the cabin's door opened. She pressed herself against the outer wall, weapon ready. Footsteps on the porch. A pause. Then a familiar voice pitched low. "I know you're there, Lynn. I'm alone. We need to talk." Ethan Walsh, Blackstone's head of security. Lynn remained motionless, evaluating options. Walsh was dangerous, highly trained, ruthless in protecting his employer's interests. But he'd announced his presence instead of ambushing her. "Why? If I wanted to harm you, I'd have done it already." Walsh continued. "I have information you need about your horses, about Blackstone's operations." Slowly, weapons still raised, Lynn emerged from cover. Walsh stood on the porch, hands visible, no weapon drawn. His expression remained professionally neutral, but something in his eyes had changed since their last encounter. "How did you find this place?" she demanded. "Same way you did." "Martha Kingsley told me." Shock registered before Lynn could mask it. Martha would never. Martha Kingsley worked for Blackstone, mining for 12 years after her husband died. Financial records administrator, had access to everything. The revelation hit like a physical blow. The elderly woman's convenient knowledge, her strategic guidance, her possession of critical historical documents, all suddenly cast in a new light. "She's been playing us." Lynn realized. Walsh nodded slightly. "Not exactly playing both sides, perhaps. Waiting to see which offered better odds. And now she's escorting your friends into a secondary ambush position while we have our conversation." Cold dread settled in Lynn's stomach. She raised her weapon fully. "Give me one reason not to shoot you right now." "Because I'm the one who arranged your horse theft," Walsh answered calmly. "The one who left that note about Samuel's death not being an accident. The one who's been trying to help you expose Blackstone without getting yourself killed in the process." Of all possible statements, this was perhaps the only one that could have kept Walsh alive in that moment. Lynn's aim remained steady, but confusion warred with her anger. "Explain quickly." "I've worked for Maxwell Blackstone for 8 years, former military intelligence. As I'm sure you've discovered, I was hired to manage security operations, protect corporate interests." Walsh's professional demeanor slipped slightly, revealing genuine disgust. "I didn't sign up to protect systematic poisoning of civilians or the murder of inconvenient witnesses. You expect me to believe you suddenly grew a conscience." "Nothing sudden about it. I've been gathering evidence against Blackstone for over a year, carefully, methodically building an airtight case." "Why?" Walsh's expression hardened. "My sister lived downstream from one of Blackstone's operations in Wyoming, developed a mysterious neurological condition, died 3 years ago, leaving 2 children behind. The connection wasn't clear to me then. Understanding dawned. But then you saw the same patterns here in Logan Valley. Blackstone's operations follow identical protocols across all sites. Same chemicals, same disposal methods, same cover-ups." Walsh's voice remained controlled but tight with suppressed emotion. "By the time I understood what was happening, I was already implicated. Complicit through association, if not direct action." Lynn's weapon remained raised. "So you decided to use me as your weapon?" "I decided to give the legendary Eagle Eye Morgan the trail she needed to follow. You had personal motivation, investigative skills, and no connections to Blackstone that could be leveraged against you." "You stole my horses," Lynn reminded him coldly. "Threatened a child. I arranged for your horses to be taken, yes, kept them safe while giving you reason to start asking questions. As for the Thompson boy, I never threatened him. That was Blackstone's independent action when he realized someone was investigating the contamination again. Sheriff Wilson's voice crackled through the radio at Lynn's hip. Morgan status, we've lost visual on Martha and Noah Grace is with me. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. If Martha had betrayed them to Blackstone, while Walsh was genuinely trying to help, the confusion could prove fatal. Where are my friends being taken? Lynn demanded. That depends on whether Martha decided Blackstone's payoff outweighed her grudge. Walsh reached slowly into his jacket, removing a satellite phone. But we can find out. He dialed, speaking briefly to someone on the other end, before offering the phone to Lynn. Mrs. Kingsley, Martha's voice came through clearly. Had to make sure Walsh was being straight with you. Your friends are safe with me at the emergency shelter, half-mile east of the cabin. Yidalif fought with lingering suspicion. Martha, are you working with Blackstone? A harsh laugh. Worked for him once. Know his methods. Been playing a long game. Waiting for the right moment. Walsh reached out 6 months ago. We've been comparing notes. Why didn't you tell me? Same reason he didn't needed genuine reactions from you. Blackstone has people who can spot a performance, but real anger, real determination, that can't be faked. The pieces rearranged themselves in Lynn's mind. The convenient evidence Martha had provided, the too perfect escape route, the cabin precisely where they needed it. You've been manipulating me from the start. She realized guiding you, Martha corrected, toward the truth about Samuel, about what happened to my Harold, about what's still happening to our community. Lynn lowered her weapon slightly, addressing Walsh directly. What's your endgame here? Same as yours. Justice for those harm, prevention of future victims? He met her gaze evenly. But Blackstone's too powerful to take down with just environmental violations. He has contingencies for those legal teams, political connections, fall guys, ready to take responsibility. What then? We need to prove he personally ordered the murders. Samuel Morgan, Ben Thompson. 3 EPA investigators who disappeared in Wyoming 2 years ago. The scope of Blackstone's crimes expanded with each revelation. This wasn't just corporate malfeasance. It was systematic elimination of threats. And you have this proof? Lynn asked skeptically. Walsh shook his head. Not yet, but I know where to find it. In Blackstone's private residence, his personal safe contains documentation of every problem. He's had eliminated insurance in case any of his associates ever turned against him. How convenient. And I suppose you want me to break into this fortress and retrieve these documents. No, I want you to create a diversion, one big enough to draw attention away from the residents while I access the safe. It sounded suspiciously like a trap. Send Lynn into danger while Walsh supposedly gathered evidence that might not exist. Why should I trust you? Walsh considered the question seriously. You shouldn't, not completely. But consider this, I could have eliminated you multiple times if that was my goal. Instead, I've helped guide you to evidence, protected your horses, and kept Blackstone's more aggressive security elements from finding you until you had what you needed. The radio crackled again. Morgan, we need a decision. Visibility's failing with nightfall. Lynn studied Walsh, evaluating everything: his body language, eye contact, the consistency of his story. Her instincts, honed through years of law enforcement, detected no obvious deception, which didn't mean it wasn't there, just better concealed than most. My horses, she said finally. Where are they? Secure facility 10 miles south of Blackstone's main property. Well treated, I assure you. Prove it. Walsh retrieved a phone from his pocket, scrolling to a photo showing Lynn's horses in a clean, spacious stable. Phantom wasn't visible. Where's my stallion? Separate accommodations. He was uncooperative with the handlers, but unharmed. That matched Phantom's temperament. The stallion would fight unfamiliar handlers, especially those with ill intent. If we do this, Lynn said slowly, I need guarantees my friends remain safe. The evidence already collected reaches federal authorities, and all my horses are returned unharmed. Agreed on all counts. Walsh's response came without hesitation. And I'll add one more guarantee. Maxwell Blackstone will face justice for Samuel's death. Personal, not just corporate. The mention of Samuel refocused Lynn's thoughts. This had begun with her husband's murder, with the truth he'd died trying to expose everything. since the horse theft. The evidence gathering the pursuit had led to this moment. "Tell me your plan," she said finally. "And it better be good." Walsh outlined a daring strategy. Blackstone was hosting a private meeting with investors the following evening, using the evacuation as pretext to demonstrate his control over local authorities. Security would be focused on the main compound. Meanwhile, his residence, built into the mountainside, half a mile away, would have minimal protection. "The safe is in his private study. Biometric lock, but I have access. He trusts me implicitly?" "Until now," Lynn pointed out. "Until now." Walsh agreed. She contacted Wilson on the radio, arranging to meet at the emergency shelter Martha had mentioned. As they hiked through the gathering darkness, Lynn maintained a careful distance from Walsh, her trust provisional at best. The emergency shelter proved to be a natural cave system expanded and reinforced decades earlier by mining operations inside NOAA. Grace and Sheriff Wilson waited tensely, weapons ready until they confirmed Lynn was there voluntarily. Introductions were tense, with Wilson maintaining a professional skepticism toward Walsh's claims. "This could still be an elaborate trap," the sheriff pointed out. "It could," Lynn acknowledged, "but the evidence supports his story, and we're running out of options." Grace examined the map Walsh provided of Blackstone's compound. "Even if we believe him, this plan is incredibly dangerous. Creating a diversion means putting ourselves in the line of fire." "Not necessarily," Noah interjected. The boy had been studying the map intently. "Look at the water system. The main compound draws from this reservoir. If someone were to introduce a harmless but visible contaminant, like Dr. Chen's chemical diversion, they'd have to evacuate." Walsh looked impressed. "The boy thinks like his father. That could work. A non-toxic but convincing contamination would trigger automatic safety protocols. Complete evacuation within minutes." They spent hours refining the plan. Grace would prepare a chemical compound that would turn the water bright blue, harmless but impossible to ignore. Noah, who knew his father's research best, would help identify optimal evidence to seek in Blackstone's files. Sheriff Wilson would coordinate with her trusted deputies to ensure federal authorities were ready to receive whatever they found. Lynn's role would be to accompany Walsh to the residence, providing backup and ensuring he actually retrieved the incriminating documents rather than destroying them. "What about me?" Martha asked. "I've got scores to settle too." "You'll coordinate communications," Wilson decided. "Your knowledge of the area makes you invaluable for escape routing." As the others prepared equipment, Lynn pulled Walsh aside. "One question you haven't answered. Why the elaborate scheme with the horses? Why not just come to me directly with what you knew?" Walsh considered his response carefully. "Two reasons. First, Blackstone monitors everything. A direct approach would have been detected. Second," he hesitated, "I needed to know if you were still the Eagle-Eye Morgan of legend. If you still had the skills and determination to see this through, no matter the obstacles." "And do I?" Lynn's voice carried a challenging edge. "You've exceeded expectations. Samuel would be proud." The mention of her husband's name from this man's lips should have angered her. Instead, it reminded her of the stakes justice delayed, but perhaps finally within reach. "If you're playing me," she warned quietly, "you won't leave that mountain alive." Walsh nodded, accepting the terms. "Fair enough." Dawn brought final preparations. Grace created her chemical diversion, while Noah and Martha established communication protocols. Sheriff Wilson cleaned her service weapon with methodical precision, her expression grim but determined. "Last chance to reconsider," she told Lynn. "Once we're on Blackstone's territory, we're committed." "I've been committed since the moment they took my horses," Lynn replied. "Everything since has just cemented the resolve." They moved out at mid-morning, traveling separately to avoid drawing attention. Walsh departed first, returning to Blackstone's compound as expected of the security chief. Wilson left next, positioning herself at a strategic overlook point where she could monitor the main facility. Grace and Noah traveled to the reservoir carrying the prepared chemicals for the diversion. Martha remained at the cave, coordinating communications through an elaborate relay system that would prevent electronic monitoring. Lynn approached last, using the forest for cover. As she made her way toward the rendezvous point, Walsh had designated a maintenance shed near the periphery of Blackstone's extensive property. Everything depended on timing and trust, neither of which felt particularly solid. Walsh could still be leading her into a trap. The diversion might fail. The evidence might not exist. So many variables, so many potential failure points. And yet a strange calm had settled over Lynn. After days of reaction and pursuit, she was finally taking the offensive, moving toward resolution, whatever form it might take. The maintenance shed appeared empty when she arrived, increasing her suspicion that Walsh had betrayed them. She waited in concealment, watching for any sign of security teams. 10 minutes past the arranged meeting time, the shed door opened. Walsh emerged, now dressed in civilian clothes rather than his security uniform. He scanned the surroundings carefully before signaling toward Lynn's position. "Slight change of plans," he explained as she approached cautiously. "Blackstone's moved the investor meeting up by 2 hours. Security positioning is different than expected." "Convenient," Lynn noted coldly. "Inconvenient. Actually, we'll have less time in the residence." Walsh handed her a security badge. "This will get you through the perimeter checkpoints. You're registered as a potential investor's assistant." Lynn examined the badge suspiciously. "And if someone checks, they won't not with what's about to happen?" As if on cue, alarms blared from the direction of the main compound. Through the trees, Lynn could see personnel rushing toward the water treatment facility, where bright blue liquid now flowed from the outlet pipes. "Right on schedule," Walsh noted with approval. "Grace's diversion is working perfectly." Security personnel converged on the water system, their radios crackling with urgent commands. Within minutes, evacuation procedures began, staff hurrying to designated assembly points, security teams establishing perimeters around the contamination. Now, Walsh directed, leading Lynn along a service road that curved around the mountainside. Blackstone's private residence soon came into view, a modernist structure of glass and stone built directly into the mountain face. Architecturally impressive, it combined natural elements with aggressive security features. Cameras monitored every approach. Reinforced glass offered views while providing ballistic protection. Service entrance. Walsh indicated, guiding her toward a less conspicuous door, partially concealed by landscaping. The security badge worked as promised, granting them access to a utility corridor. Inside, the residence was eerily quiet, the staff apparently responding to the emergency at the main facility. "Studies on the upper level," Walsh explained, leading her toward a staircase. "We have maybe 15 minutes before someone thinks to check on the residence." The upper floor featured sweeping views of the mountain landscape. Art pieces worth millions decorated walls of polished stone. Everything spoke of wealth accumulated without regard to cost, financial or human. Walsh approached a heavy wooden door, placing his palm against a concealed scanner. After a moment, the lock disengaged. "Blackstone's private study. Only 3 people have access: himself, his executive assistant, and me." The room beyond matched its owner's personality, imposing, meticulously organized, designed to intimidate. A massive desk dominated the space, positioned to take advantage of panoramic views while placing visitors at psychological disadvantage. "The safe," Lynn prompted. Walsh moved to a bookshelf, activating a hidden mechanism. The shelf slid sideways, revealing a steel door with both electronic and biometric security measures. Moment of truth. Lynn observed, hand resting near her concealed weapon. Walsh placed his palm on the scanner, entered a code, then leaned forward for retinal verification. Seconds stretched into uncomfortable silence before a series of metallic clicks signaled the safe unlocking. "He really does trust you," Lynn noted. "Trust is relative in Blackstone's world. He trusts me because he believes he owns me." Walsh pulled the heavy door open. "Let's prove him wrong." Inside, organized with obsessive precision, lay documents, storage drives, and small containers. Walsh methodically examined labels, selecting specific items, and placing them in a secure case he'd brought. "Financial records," he explained, indicating one set, proving systematic fraud to cover environmental remediation costs. "Medical data showing he was aware of contamination effects years before any public acknowledgement." And this, he held up a small drive. "Security footage he believed was destroyed. Shows him personally directing the handling of problems, including your husband." Lynn stared at the innocent-looking drive, her heart pounding. Actual video evidence of Blackstone ordering Samuel's death. Make copies of everything. She instructed, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Already done. Some. Walsh continued his systematic collection. Blackstone believes in redundancy, so do I. A document caught Lynn's attention, a folder marked Morgan Property Acquisition Strategy. She pulled it out, finding detailed plans for forcing her to sell Daybreak Ranch after Samuel's accident. Property assessments, financial projections, manipulated water rights documentation. He wanted my land. She realized that's why Samuel was investigating the water contamination. It was affecting our property directly. Blackstone's been systematically acquiring properties along the valley watershed. Walsh confirmed your ranch sits at a critical junction. When you refused to sell after Samuel's death, it complicated his plans. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Not just murder for silence, but murder for territorial expansion. Corporate greed in its most deadly form. Walsh finished his collection, securing the case. We need to move. Security will have realized something's wrong by now. They had just reached the staircase when alarms shrieked through the residence. Not the environmental warning from before, but security breach notifications. They've detected us, Walsh confirmed grimly, alternate exit. Now, he led her rapidly through a service corridor toward what appeared to be a dead end. Pressing a concealed panel revealed another passage, a private escape route. Blackstone's paranoia works in our favor, Walsh explained as they hurried through the narrow tunnel. He built multiple evacuation routes in case of threats. The passage emerged in a camouflage bunker 30 yards from the main structure. Beyond lay forest cover, if they could reach it before security teams converged. Voices shouted commands nearby. Flashlight beams cut through the gathering dusk. They're establishing a perimeter, Walsh observed. Standard procedure would be to work inward from established containment points. Lynn assessed their options. The creek bed. It's a blind spot in their positioning. They made a dash for the shallow stream that cut across the property, using its banks for concealment as they moved away from the residence. Behind them, security teams coordinated a systematic search, unaware their quarry had already slipped through the net. Half a mile downstream, they found Sheriff Wilson waiting at the predetermined extraction point. Success, she asked tersely. Walsh patted the secure case. Everything we need, video evidence of Blackstone ordering Morgan's death, financial records showing deliberate fraud, medical data proving knowledge of contamination effects. Convenient that it was all so neatly organized, Wilson noted skeptically. Blackstone's pathologically methodical. Walsh explained, documents everything as insurance against betrayal. Never imagined his own security chief would be the threat. Lynn maintained her guard, still not entirely trusting Walsh, despite the evidence he'd secured. The evidence gets turned over to federal authorities immediately. No delays, no excerpts, nothing held back. Agreed. Walsh handed the case to Wilson. Your deputies have secure routes to FBI offices. The sheriff nodded. Already in motion. I've got 3 teams converging on different federal facilities, plus encrypted digital transmission if we can reach secure uplink. What about the others? Lynn asked. Grace, Noah, Martha. Rendezvous point, Charlie, 20 minutes from here. The reunion at the concealed cabin was tense but triumphant. Grace and Noah had successfully executed their diversion without being detected. Martha had maintained communications throughout, providing critical updates on security movements. Blackstone's in full crisis mode, the elderly woman reported with grim satisfaction. Called in every security contractor within 100 miles. Federal agencies are starting to ask questions about the massive security presence. Walsh examined the evidence once more before Wilson's deputies departed with separate packages. This ends his empire. Not just environmental crimes, but conspiracy, murder, fraud across state lines. If it reaches federal authorities intact, Lynn reminded him, it will. Wilson's confidence was absolute. My people aren't just couriers. They're sworn officers with federal contacts of their own, multiple redundancies. As night fell, they maintained vigilance, knowing Blackstone would be mobilizing every resource to find them. The evidence Walsh had secured represented not just criminal liability, but complete destruction of the empire he'd built. What happens now? Noah asked the question directed at Lynn rather than the group. Now we wait, she answered honestly. Federal wheels turn slowly, but they're grinding into motion. Within days, there will be official action against Blackstone and his operation. And my mom, the others who are sick. Grace answered this. The evidence includes medical data that will help develop targeted treatments. It won't undo the damage, but it can prevent further harm and possibly help those already affected. The boy nodded, processing this. His young face showed the weight of everything he'd experienced. Loss, betrayal, danger, and now tentative hope. My dad would be glad that it wasn't for nothing. It wasn't for nothing, Lynn assured him. Neither was Samuel's sacrifice. They started something important, something that will save lives. Walsh, who had been monitoring communications, approached with new information. Blackstone's making a move. Emergency vehicles heading toward his main compound. Looks like he's staging a medical situation, probably to justify evacuation by helicopter. He's running, Wilson realized, preparing to disappear before federal agents arrive. We can't let that happen, Lynn stated firmly, not after everything it's cost to get this far. Walsh nodded agreement. If he reaches his private airfield, he has resources to disappear permanently. Offshore accounts, multiple identities, properties in non-extradition countries. The group exchanged glances, the unspoken question hanging in the air. How far were they willing to go to ensure justice? I can delay him. Walsh offered, security protocols give me authority to ground aircraft during active threats. He'll override you, Lynn pointed out, the moment he suspects your involvement. Then we need a more direct approach. Wilson checked her weapon, legitimate law enforcement intervention. Why not? Martha, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. There's another way, one that doesn't risk any of you. All eyes turned to the elderly woman whose weathered face held a determined expression. Blackstone's chopper will use the northern corridor to avoid population centers, standard evacuation route. She unfolded a map indicating a narrow passage between mountain peaks. There's a fire lookout tower with direct line of sight. Built in the 1930s, abandoned now. But the tower itself is sound. Lynn immediately understood observation post documenting his escape attempt. More than observation, Martha's expression remained steady. My herald wasn't just a miner, served as artillery observer in Korea. Taught me a few things about trajectories and timing. The implication hung heavily in the cabin. Martha was suggesting a sniper position, not to observe, but to intervene. That's too far. Wilson objected both to the distance and the implied action, and not legal intervention. Not for my old Winchester, Martha agreed. But for this, she moved to a concealed compartment in the floor, retrieving a long case. Distance isn't an issue. Inside lay a precision rifle with advanced optics, a weapon no ordinary ranch wife would possess. Martha, Grace began cautiously, what exactly did you do after Harold died? Let's just say mining company compensation didn't pay all the bills. The older woman's smile held no warmth. Government contracts filled the gaps. Some required specialized skills. Another layer of Martha's past revealed not just a mining company employee, but someone with tactical training and experience. Lynn considered the moral implications alongside the practical ones. If Blackstone escapes now, he'll use his resources to fight extradition for years. Continue operations through proxies, people will keep dying. But shooting down a helicopter? Wilson shook her head. That crosses a line we can't uncross. Who said anything about shooting it down? Martha closed the rifle case. Precision shot to the tail. Rotor housing will force an emergency landing. Dramatic but survivable with a competent pilot. Blackstone gets delayed, not killed. The distinction was important, preventing escape rather than executing judgment. Still, the legality remained questionable at best. I'll do it, Martha declared before anyone could object further. My hands, my decision. Been waiting 30 years to balance accounts with Maxwell Blackstone. The determination in her voice broke no argument. This was personal for Martha in ways even Lynn couldn't fully comprehend. Decades of watching a community poisoned her husband's death, unaddressed her own complicity in Blackstone's operations. weighing on her conscience. "You'll need spotting," Lynn said finally. "Wind conditions in that corridor are unpredictable." Martha nodded acknowledgement. "Was hoping you'd volunteer." Eagle Eye's reputation wasn't just about tracking. The decision made, they moved quickly. Martha and Lynn would position at the fire tower with communication links to Walsh monitoring Blackstone's movements and Wilson coordinating with federal authorities. Grace and Noah would remain at the cabin with the evidence copies ready to move if the situation deteriorated. The night had deepened by the time Lynn and Martha reached the abandoned fire tower. Despite its age, the structure remained sound, offering both elevation and concealment. From its platform, they had clear sight lines to the narrow corridor. Blackstone's helicopter would need to navigate. Martha set up her equipment with practiced efficiency, checking sight lines and calculating distances. Lynn established communications with Walsh, who reported increased activity at Blackstone's compound. Medical transport being prepared. He confirmed flight plan filed for emergency evacuation to Billings departure in approximately 40 minutes. Cowboy federal response. Lynn asked FBI strike team mobilizing, but they're still 90 minutes out. Won't intercept before takeoff. Martha calibrated her scope, her weathered hands steady despite the stakes. Winds from the northwest, 8 knots, updraft in the corridor will affect trajectory. Lynn scanned the flight path with binoculars, noting conditions. Temperature dropping, air density increasing, need to adjust calculations. They worked in practice tandem like partners who had done this many times before, rather than first-time collaborators. Martha's military precision complemented Lynn's observational skills. "You've done this before?" Lynn noted as they completed preparations. Martha's expression remained focused on her equipment. "Different targets. Same principles. You never forget the fundamentals." Ederum, the revelation of Martha's apparent background as a military-trained operator, explained much about her capabilities and knowledge. Like so many in this unfolding drama, she was far more than she appeared on the surface. Walsh's voice crackled through their communication link. "Helicopter powering up Blackstone is moving to the landing pad with 3 security personnel and a medical team. Using a stretcher as cover?" "Clever," Martha acknowledged. Emergency medical evacuation gives him both justification and protective cover. ETA to intercept point. Lynn asked, approximately 12 minutes after takeoff, they'll follow the eastern ridge, then turn northwest through the corridor. Martha made final adjustments to her rifle. One-shot tail rotor housing causes mechanical failure without catastrophic crash. The ethical complexity of their position wasn't lost on Lynn. They were planning to force down an aircraft in action that, regardless of intent, carried life-threatening risk, and yet allowing Blackstone to escape meant continuing suffering for countless others. Helicopter airborne. Walsh reported following expected route. Minutes stretched with excruciating slowness as they tracked the aircraft's approach. The distinctive thump of rotor blades gradually became audible, growing louder as the helicopter entered the corridor. Through her binoculars, Lynn could make out the sleek shape against the night sky, a medical transport helicopter moving with purpose through the narrow passage. "Range 2,000 yards and closing," she reported, wind holding steady at 8 knots northwest. Martha's breathing slowed her entire being, focused through the rifle scope. Target acquired, tail rotor assembly, visible, 1,500 yards, slight crosswind developing from the east. Compensating. The helicopter continued its approach, unaware of the waiting intercept. 1,000 yards, Lynn called, clear shot profile. Martha's finger rested lightly on the trigger, her concentration absolute. On my mark. The moment stretched, pregnant with consequence. Hold, Lynn suddenly instructed, something catching her attention. Second aircraft approaching, fast mover from the south. Martha paused, maintaining her sight picture, while Lynn assessed the new development. Helicopter designation. Lynn reported reading markings through her binoculars. Federal FBI tactical team. The realization dawned simultaneously. Federal response had arrived faster than anticipated, perhaps due to Wilson's connections or the evidence already reaching authorities. "Stand down." Lynn decided, let them handle the intercept. Martha didn't immediately relax her position. For a moment, Lynn feared the older woman's personal vendetta might override tactical logic. "Martha," she said quietly, "this is better legal intervention, due process." After a long moment, Martha exhaled slowly and lifted her finger from the trigger. 30 years waiting for justice. What's a few more hours? They watched as the FBI helicopter rapidly closed the distance to Blackstone's transport. Radio communications indicated federal agents ordering the medical helicopter to divert to a designated landing zone. Initially, Blackstone's pilot appeared to be complying, adjusting course as directed. Then abruptly, the helicopter banked sharply, attempting to evade intercept by diving toward a narrow side canyon. "He's running," Martha stated unnecessarily, bringing her rifle back into position. Before she could act, the FBI helicopter cut off the escape route, forcing Blackstone's pilot to make a desperate maneuver, one that brought them dangerously close to the canyon wall. What happened next unfolded with terrible inevitability. The medical helicopter's rotor clipped the rock face, sending the aircraft into an uncontrolled spin. Despite the pilot's evident skill, the damage was too severe to recover. The helicopter descended rapidly, crashing into the forested slope below. Not a catastrophic impact, but violent enough to raise serious concerns about survivors. "Walsh," Lynn called urgently into the radio. "Blackstone's helicopter down in Serpent Canyon. Coordinates to follow medical response needed immediately." The FBI helicopter was already descending toward the crash site tactical team, deploying to secure the scene. Martha slowly lowered her rifle, her expression unreadable. "Not how I imagined it, but perhaps fitting." "We don't know if he survived," Lynn reminded her. "Almost doesn't matter now. The evidence is what will destroy him, dead or alive." "Navhornin." Martha began dismantling her equipment with the same methodical precision she'd used to assemble it. "His legacy ends tonight either way." They descended from the fire tower in silence, each processing the implications of what they'd witnessed. Justice had arrived for Maxwell Blackstone, though not in the form they'd anticipated. By dawn, the full situation had become clear. Blackstone had survived the crash with serious injuries. 2 security personnel were dead, while the pilot and medical team sustained non-life-threatening wounds. More significantly, federal agents had seized Blackstone's emergency travel case, containing additional incriminating documents and financial records. Combined with the evidence Walsh had provided, it created an overwhelming case that extended beyond environmental crimes to include racketeering, conspiracy, and multiple counts of murder. "He'll spend the rest of his life in prison," Sheriff Wilson confirmed when they regrouped at Martha's cabin, "if he survives his injuries." "And the wider operation?" Lynn asked. "Dismantling as we speak. Federal seizure orders issued for all Blackstone mining properties, emergency environmental containment teams deploying to affected sites." Grace looked up from examining Noah, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion after days of stress and danger. "What about the medical data treatment for those already affected? One, CDC and NIH both involved now." Wilson assured her, "Your research combined with the Blackstone files gives them a roadmap for treatment protocols." The conversation turned to more personal matters, specifically the status of Lynn's stolen horses. "Already recovered," Walsh reported, "being transported to Sheriff Wilson's impound facility for safekeeping until you can reclaim them." "Phantom Lynn?" asked the stallion, foremost in her concerns. A smile touched Walsh's normally impassive features. "Gave 3 handlers hell during the recovery operation, broke one man's wrist, seems eager to return to your care." Relief washed through her. The horses had been the beginning of this journey. Their theft, the catalyst that had awakened her from 2 years of grief-induced withdrawal. Their recovery symbolically completed the circle. "What happens to you now?" she asked Walsh directly. "Your role in Blackstone's operation won't go unnoticed." "Cooperating witness," he replied with a shrug. "My evidence against Blackstone buys considerable leniency, perhaps even immunity depending on how the prosecutors evaluate my assistance. And if that falls through, then I face the consequences of my choices." His expression remained stoic. "Some debts can't be negotiated away." As morning light strengthened, they prepared to separate, each returning to lives fundamentally altered by recent events. Sheriff Wilson would coordinate with federal authorities. Grace would begin working with medical teams on treatment protocols. Martha would provide testimony about historic Blackstone operations. Noah's future remained uncertain, but Grace had arranged for him and his mother to receive specialized treatment at a research hospital in Denver, with all costs covered by federal victim assistance programs. Lynn found the boy sitting alone on Martha's porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountain peaks gold. "What happens now?" he asked as she joined him. "Justice," she answered simply. "For your father, for my husband, for everyone harmed by Blackstone's greed." Noah nodded, his young face showing a maturity beyond his years. "Dad would be proud that we finished what he started." "That you finished it?" Lynn corrected gently. "Your courage made the difference. Knowing your father's research, understanding what we were looking for, we couldn't have done it without you." The boy absorbed this, straightening slightly with the acknowledgement, "Will you go back to being sheriff now? People still talk about Eagle Eye Morgan." Lynn considered the question seriously. The past weeks had reawakened parts of herself she'd thought permanently buried with Samuel. Her investigative instincts, her determination, her belief in justice over expediency. Not sheriff, she decided, but perhaps not just a horse rancher either. There's work to be done tracking the effects of Blackstone's operations, making sure similar situations don't develop elsewhere. The idea took shape as she spoke at a new purpose, combining her investigative skills with her commitment to the community Samuel had loved. "Whatever you do," Noah said with unexpected wisdom, "he'd want you to live again, not just exist." The simple truth in his words struck deeper than any adult consolation had managed in 2 years of grief. As they prepared to depart, Walsh approached Lynn one final time. "I have something for you," he said, offering a small data drive. "Security footage from the night Samuel died confirms everything we suspected about Blackstone's involvement." Lynn took the drive, its weight insignificant compared to its importance. "There's more," Walsh continued. "Samuel didn't die immediately in the crash. He recorded a final message on his phone. Blackstone's men recovered it, but I made a copy before they destroyed the original." Her heart stuttered. "A message. For you," his last words. The drive now felt impossibly heavy in her palm. Samuel's voice preserved from beyond death, his final thoughts intended for her alone. "Thank you," she managed emotion, threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. Walsh nodded once, understanding the magnitude of his gift. "I'll be in touch about the federal case. They'll need your testimony." With that, he departed, a complicated figure whose moral complexity defied simple categorization. Neither hero nor villain, but something uniquely human in between. The journey back to civilization brought a strange mixture of emotions. Relief at danger past, satisfaction at justice served, grief freshly awakened by the prospect of hearing Samuel's voice again. Sheriff Wilson arranged transportation for Lynn back to Daybreak Ranch, where Phantom and the other horses would be delivered once veterinarians had checked them thoroughly. The ranch appeared unchanged when Lynn finally arrived home, the buildings standing peaceful in afternoon light, the fields empty without their equine inhabitants. Yet everything felt different, transformed by the journey she'd undertaken. Inside the house held echoes of Samuel more strongly than before. Not the painful absence she lived with for 2 years, but a sense of presence, of continuation rather than ending. When she finally found the courage to connect the data drive to her computer, her hands trembled slightly. The file contained a single video time-stamped from the night of Samuel's death. Her husband's face appeared on screen, bloodied but conscious in the wreckage of his truck. His breathing, labored eyes focused with effort as he spoke into his phone's camera. "Lynn, if you're seeing this, things went badly. The evidence Ben and I gathered about Blackstone, it's more damning than we imagined. Not just environmental damage, but deliberate poisoning to force land sales." He paused, gathering strength. "Someone forced me off the road. Professional hit, not an accident." Samuel coughed, grimacing in pain before continuing. "The evidence is hidden at Jensen's Creek. Our spot Ben knows, to redundancy in case something happened to either of us." His expression softened, eyes filling with emotion. "Lynn, my love, I know this will devastate you, but please don't retreat from the world. Your strength, your sense of justice, they're needed. Don't let grief dim your light. Don't abandon who you are." A sad smile touched his bloodied lips. "Remember when we first met? You were bringing in that fugitive who'd eluded every marshal in 3 states. I thought you were the most magnificent woman I'd ever seen. Still do. His breathing grew more labored. I have no regrets, Lynn. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Whatever happens next, know that some truths can't be buried forever. Justice finds a way, often through people like you. The video ended as sounds of approaching vehicles caused Samuel to hide the phone. His final recorded moments showed determination rather than fear, courage rather than despair. Lynn sat motionless, tears streaming unchecked. Not the paralyzing grief of before, but something cleaner. A release, a connection, a completion of a circle. Samuel had died seeking truth and justice. She had honored that quest by finishing what he started, not through vengeance but through the same determination to expose wrongdoing that had guided his final days. The sound of vehicles approaching drew her attention. Through the window she saw trailers arriving, her horses returning home, and leading them powerful and proud Phantom galloped directly to the fence nearest the house, trumpeting a greeting. Lynn stepped onto the porch watching as the stallion paced impatiently, demanding her attention. "I'm here, boy," she called, walking toward him. "We're both home now." As she approached, Phantom tossed his head, eyes bright with intelligence and what looked remarkably like satisfaction. He had played his part in this journey too, escaping his captors, finding her in the forest, carrying them to safety when needed. Lynn stroked his powerful neck, feeling the living connection to both present and past. Samuel was right. She told the horse quietly, "Some truths can't stay buried, and it's time for me to stop burying parts of myself." In the distance, thunder rumbled across the valley, not threatening, but cleansing. Promise of rain to nurture land too long parched. Much like justice had finally come to a community too long poisoned by corruption and greed. Eagle Eye Morgan hadn't simply returned during this crisis. She had evolved into something more complex. A woman who combined the tracker's precision with a rancher's patience, a widow's determination with a justice seeker's clarity of purpose. As the first raindrops fell, Lynn remained with Phantom, her hand resting on his neck. The journey wasn't ending. It was transforming beyond grief, beyond vengeance, into something that honored both Samuel's memory and her own future. Justice had been served, truth had emerged. And in the process, Lynn Morgan had found her way back to herself, not unchanged but stronger, for having traveled through darkness to reach new light. The evening storm washed over Daybreak Ranch, cleansing and renewing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, testimony for federal prosecutors, assistance for contamination victims, rebuilding a community shattered by corporate greed. But for tonight, Lynn simply stood with her horses in gentle rain, feeling more alive than she had in 2 years. The echoes of the past no longer paralyzed her. Instead, they provided foundation for whatever came next. And for the first time since Samuel's death, that future held promise rather than mere existence, a path forward illuminated by justice served and purpose renewed. The shadow of Eagle Eye Morgan stretched long across the Montana landscape once more, not as law enforcement, but as something perhaps more powerful. A guardian of truth in a land still healing from lies too long believed. "We did it, Samuel," she whispered to the rain-washed evening. "We did it." And somewhere between memory and faith, she could almost hear his answer on the wind. 3 months after Maxwell Blackstone's arrest, the first federal indictments came down like thunder across Montana. 27 individuals charged with crimes ranging from environmental violations to conspiracy and murder. Corporate accounts frozen, assets seized, operations halted pending comprehensive safety reviews. Lynn watched the news coverage from Daybreak Ranch's newly repaired front porch, Phantom grazing contentedly nearby. The stallion had settled back into ranch life with remarkable ease. Though he remained wary of strangers, a trait Lynn now shared more openly than before, Grace Chen arrived as the broadcast ended, her medical bag replaced by a briefcase full of documents. At Lynn's invitation, the doctor had established a specialized clinic for treating contamination victims operating from Daybreak's renovated guest house, while a permanent facility was constructed in town. Quite the media circus. Grace observed, nodding toward the television. "Though they're still missing half the story, the official narrative serves its purpose." Lynn replied, "Justice is happening even if the public doesn't know all the players involved." The official version portrayed a straightforward investigation into environmental violations discovered by concerned citizens, evidence provided to authorities, federal intervention, resulting in corporate accountability. The roles played by Walsh, Martha, even Lynn herself remained largely undocumented, a deliberate choice to protect those whose methods hadn't always aligned with strict legal procedures. "How's Noah's mother responding to treatment?" Lynn asked as they settled into porch chairs. "Better than expected. The targeted protocols developed from Blackstone's research data are showing remarkable results." Grace's expression brightened. She might achieve full recovery within a year. "And the others?" "Varying responses based on exposure levels and duration, but universally better outcomes than we initially projected." This represented the most meaningful justice of all healing for those harmed by corporate greed. The federal prosecution would punish wrongdoing, but Grace's work repaired the damage done to innocent lives. "You've been summoned for testimony next month," Grace asked. Lynn nodded. "Grand jury proceedings against Ryan Coulter and the remaining security personnel. Walsh's cooperation has streamlined much of it, but they still need first-hand accounts." Walsh had proven surprisingly valuable to federal prosecutors, providing detailed documentation of Blackstone's criminal enterprise. His testimony had already secured indictments against senior executives and corrupt officials. In exchange, he'd received limited immunity, accountability without destruction. Sheriff Wilson's cruiser appeared on the driveway, dust billowing behind it. The Jefferson County Sheriff had become a regular visitor, coordinating ongoing investigations while providing updates on federal proceedings. "Morning, ladies," Wilson greeted as she joined them. "Caught the news? Just finished." Lynn confirmed. "They're emphasizing the environmental charges. Easier for the public to grasp than the conspiracy web." Wilson accepted the coffee Grace offered. "But the murder indictments are proceeding regardless. Blackstone, Walsh, and 4 others charged directly in Samuel's death." Lynn absorbed this with complex emotions, justice advancing, yet Samuel remained gone. No legal proceeding could restore what had been taken. "Any word on Ryan?" she asked. Wilson's expression sobered. "Still cooperating. His testimony about Blackstone's influence over local law enforcement has opened investigations in 3 more counties." Coulter's fate remained uncertain, his initial assistance balanced against years of corruption. Lynn's feelings toward her former colleague had evolved from betrayal to a complicated pity. He'd made wrong choices, continuing them until they became inescapable patterns. His eventual attempt at redemption had come too late to fully absolve him, yet still represented a human capacity for change. "Martha sends her regards," Wilson continued. "Federal marshals have her sequestered until the conspiracy trial, but she's apparently educating them about proper rifle maintenance." The image brought a smile to Lynn's face. Martha Kingsley remained defiantly herself despite becoming a key federal witness. Her testimony about Blackstone's historic operations provided crucial context for current charges. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, a government SUV bearing federal markings. Lynn recognized the passenger immediately, Agent Kendra Rivera, the FBI lead who had taken over the Blackstone investigation. Miss Morgan Rivera greeted as she approached the porch. "Dr. Chen's sheriff." Though their initial contact had been during crisis, Rivera had proven herself both competent and honorable during the subsequent investigation. Unlike many federal officials, Lynn had encountered the agent respected local knowledge and avoided bureaucratic obstruction. "What brings you to Daybreak?" Lynn inquired. "More testimony requests." "Actually, I'm here about Maxwell Blackstone." Rivera's expression remained professionally neutral. "He's requesting a meeting with you." The unexpected statement landed like a stone in still water, rippling through Lynn's carefully maintained composure. "Why would I agree to that? He claims to have information about other operations similar to his. Mining companies using the same contamination methods in different states." Rivera watched Lynn's reaction carefully. "Information he'll share only with you." "Manipulation," Grace interjected. "He's playing games from his hospital bed." Blackstone remained under medical supervision while awaiting trial, his injuries from the helicopter crash requiring multiple surgeries. Reports suggested he might never walk again. "Probably," Rivera acknowledged. "But if there's even a chance he has actionable intelligence about ongoing contamination elsewhere." The implication hung in the air. Other communities potentially suffering as Logan Valley had. Other families facing illness without understanding why other children like Noah, losing parents to corporate greed. "I'll consider it," Lynn said finally, "but I need time." Rivera nodded, understanding. "The offer remains open. Meanwhile, there's something else you should know." She retrieved a folder from her briefcase. "We've been investigating Blackstone's financial operations, tracing assets, identifying victims entitled to restitution." The agent opened the folder, revealing property documents. "We discovered that Samuel Morgan had been quietly purchasing land parcels around your ranch. Small properties held through a shell company." Lynn's confusion must have shown on her face. "According to records we've recovered, Samuel was creating a buffer zone." Rivera explained, buying properties Blackstone wanted, preventing him from establishing contamination sources near daybreak. A new dimension of Samuel's final months emerged, not just investigating wrongdoing, but actively protecting their home and livelihood. "These parcels legally belong to Samuel's estate," Rivera continued, "which means they're yours now. Combined with federal seizures of adjacent Blackstone properties, your ranch is effectively surrounded by protected land." Lynn accepted the documents, emotions threatening to overwhelm her, carefully maintained composure. Even in death, Samuel continued protecting what they'd built together. After Rivera departed, Lynn retreated to the stable, finding solace in Phantom's quiet presence. The stallion seemed to sense her turmoil, remaining unnaturally still as she leaned against his powerful shoulder. "What would you do, Samuel?" she whispered. "Face the man who ordered your death. Use him to help others, or refuse to give him the satisfaction?" No answer came except the gentle rhythm of Phantom's breathing and the distant sounds of ranch life continuing. Yet somehow that seemed response enough. Life continuing, purpose enduring beyond loss. That evening, Noah called from Denver, where he and his mother were receiving specialized treatment. The boy's voice carried excitement unusual for his typically serious demeanor. "Mom stood up today," he reported, "actually stood without support for almost 5 minutes." "That's wonderful," Lynn replied, genuine warmth filling her voice. "Dr. Chen will be thrilled to hear it. The doctors say it's because of the treatment protocols developed from Blackstone's research data." Ironic, isn't it? The evidence that got Dad killed is saving Mom's life. The observation held wisdom beyond Noah's years, the complex reality that good could emerge from evil, healing from harm, justice from wrongdoing. "When are you coming back to Logan Valley?" Lynn asked. "Another month, maybe 2. Then decisions." Uncertainty colored his voice. "Our house, the farm, everything's still contaminated. Federal cleanup teams say it could be years before it's safe." "You have options, Noah. Your father's research is helping build the reparations case. There will be financial compensation. It's not about money, it's about home." The boy's voice caught slightly. "Dad's buried there." Our history, Lynn understood all too well. Despite everything Blackstone had done, she couldn't imagine abandoning Daybreak, the home she'd built with Samuel, the land that held their shared dreams. "There's room here," she offered, the words emerging before she'd fully formed the thought. "The foreman's house needs renovation, but it's sound. You and your mother would be welcome." Silence stretched across the connection then. "You mean that?" "I do. This place is too big for one person, and I could use help with the horses." The conversation continued, practical details interspersed with more emotional considerations. By its conclusion, tentative plans had formed a new configuration of lives, disrupted by tragedy, yet continuing forward. After hanging up, Lynn sat on the porch watching darkness claim the valley stars emerged overhead, indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow comforting in their constancy. Her decision about Blackstone's request crystallized gradually, not through analysis but through instinct honed by recent events. She would meet him not for closure or confrontation, but for the potential to prevent others from suffering as Logan Valley had. The federal detention hospital where Blackstone awaited trial resided within a nondescript government complex outside Helena security measures, belied the building's unremarkable exterior. Multiple checkpoints, biometric verification, armed guards at regular intervals. Lynn surrendered her personal items, submitted to screening procedures, and followed a stone-faced marshal through sterile corridors. Agent Rivera accompanied her, providing both official supervision and moral support. He's been improving physically, Rivera noted as they approached the secure medical wing, regained limited mobility in his lower extremities. Doctors say he might eventually walk with assistance. And mentally, calculating, manipulative, occasionally violent toward staff. The agent's expression remained neutral, essentially unchanged. Maxwell Blackstone occupied a private room that balanced medical necessity with security protocols. Monitoring equipment surrounded a hospital bed where a diminished version of the once imposing man reclined. At 65, Blackstone had previously projected power through impeccable appearance and commanding presence. Now hospital garments and medical vulnerability stripped away those artifices. Gray hair hung limply rather than perfectly styled. Skin had taken on the pallor of prolonged indoor confinement. Yet his eyes remained unchanged, cold, calculating, assessing Lynn as she entered as though she were a business proposition rather than a human whose life he'd irreparably damaged. Miss Morgan. His voice retained its cultured precision despite circumstances. "You've kept me waiting." Lynn maintained neutral expression as she took the visitor's chair. Rivera indicated, "You're facing multiple life sentences. Mr. Blackstone waiting seems appropriate." A thin smile acknowledged her response. Direct, refreshing after months of bureaucratic doublespeak. "I didn't come for pleasantries. Agent Rivera says you have information about other contamination sites." "Always business first." Blackstone adjusted his position slightly, the movement revealing lingering pain despite his attempted dignity. "Like your husband, Samuel never understood the social niceties of corporate negotiations either." The casual mention of Samuel tested Lynn's composure. She maintained steady eye contact, refusing to reveal the emotional impact of hearing her husband's name from his murderer's lips. "The information, Mr. Blackstone, or I leave now." He studied her with unsettling intensity before nodding slightly. 3 operations, Wyoming, Idaho, Eastern Washington, using identical chemical compounds and disposal methods, deliberately contaminating groundwater to depress property values before acquisition. Names, Lynn pressed. "Corporations are merely vehicles, Miss Morgan. The names change regularly. The principles, however." He reached for a water-cup hand, trembling slightly. "Gareth Holloway, Victor Mercer, Elizabeth Chen." Lynn noted Rivera's subtle reaction to the final name. Recognition or surprise quickly masked. "These individuals operate similarly to my former enterprise." Blackstone continued, "though without my attention to detail or contingency planning, hence their continued freedom while I reside here. You're offering competitors for prosecution. I'm offering truth, Miss Morgan. What you choose to do with it remains your decision." The calculated performance contained multiple layers: cooperation that served personal vendettas, information sharing that cost him nothing while potentially benefiting his legal position. "Why tell me specifically, why not federal prosecutors who could offer considerations in exchange?" Blackstone's expression shifted subtly, something almost like respect appearing briefly. "Because unlike federal bureaucrats, you understand personal motivation, the difference between corporate malfeasance and deliberate harm." "You murdered my husband," Lynn stated flatly. "That seems quite deliberate. Business necessity." No remorse colored his tone. Samuel discovered a fundamental operational component. His elimination protected significant investments. The cold calculation behind his words should have provoked rage. Instead, Lynn felt a strange clarity. Blackstone wasn't evil in conventional terms. He simply operated from a moral framework where financial gain justified any action, where human lives represented acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of profit. "These other operations," she redirected, "are they currently contaminating communities? Actively using compounds similar to those we developed, resulting in comparable health impacts?" Rivera interjected, "We'll need specifics, locations, chemical compositions, documentation." "Provided Miss Morgan agrees to certain conditions." Blackstone's gaze remained fixed on Lynn. "Regular consultations. My expertise applied to detection and remediation efforts." The manipulation was transparent, creating ongoing connection, establishing value to federal authorities, potentially improving his legal position through cooperation. You want relevance? Lynn observed. Continued influence, despite incarceration? A thin smile acknowledged her accuracy. Pragmatism, Miss Morgan. My circumstances are fixed, my remaining lifespan limited by age and injury. Legacy becomes the primary consideration. Legacy, disbelief, colored her tone. You poisoned communities, destroyed lives, ordered murders. That's your legacy. Unless balanced by meaningful contribution to remediation efforts, Blackstone's expression remained calculating. History remembers results, not intentions I'm offering. Opportunity to address ongoing harm using my specialized knowledge. The proposition was morally complex. Using Blackstone's expertise could potentially save lives currently at risk from similar operations. Yet doing so meant engaging with Samuel's murderer, granting him the relevance he sought. I'll consider it, Lynn said, finally rising to indicate the meeting's conclusion. Agent Rivera will handle any information you provide about active contamination sites. As she turned to leave, Blackstone called after her. One more thing, Miss Morgan, about your horses. Lynn paused without turning. The stallion in particular, phantom, magnificent animal, I had him evaluated while in my possession. His bloodline is extraordinary, worth far more than you likely realize. She faced him again, expression controlled, but intensity unmistakable. My horses were never about monetary value, Mr. Blackstone. Something your worldview can't comprehend. Perhaps, but value exists regardless of recognition. His clinical detachment remained undisturbed. Your husband understood the breeding program he established with that stallion was brilliant market positioning. Premium bloodstock for a growing demand segment. The casual reference to Samuel's plans for their ranch plans, discussed privately between husband and wife, revealed how thoroughly Blackstone had investigated them before acting, how comprehensively he had assessed them as obstacles to be removed. Lynn left without further response, maintaining composure until reaching the privacy of Rivera's government vehicle. There, the full impact of confronting Samuel's murderer finally registered, not in tears or rage, but in bone-deep certainty that justice, however imperfect, was proceeding as it should. Are you all right? Rivera asked as they departed the facility. Better than expected, Lynn answered honestly. He's just a man, a damaged, calculating man whose empire is crumbling around him. His information about other operations appears legitimate. Preliminary validation confirms sites in Wyoming and Idaho with unusual contamination patterns. He'll expect something in return. Undoubtedly, but federal prosecutors are skilled at extracting cooperation without excessive concessions. The Montana landscape rolled past the vehicle windows, mountains etched against clear sky valleys, nurturing communities that would now have chance to heal from Blackstone's systematic poisoning. He mentioned Elizabeth Chen. Lynn noted, any relation to Grace Himo? Rivera's expression revealed professional caution. Possibly distant. We're investigating all connections. Corporate environmental crimes often involve surprisingly small networks of specialized expertise. The implication troubled Lynn. Grace had become integral to recovery efforts in Logan Valley, her medical expertise crucial for treating contamination victims. The possibility of connection to Blackstone's criminal associates seemed inconceivable. Yet recent months had revealed how appearances could mask complex realities. Martha Kingsley's hidden tactical training, Walsh's dual loyalties, Ryan Coulter's corruption, beneath badge and oath. I should warn you, Rivera continued, federal investigators will explore all possible connections, including Grace Chen's background and potential knowledge of contamination sources. Grace has dedicated her life to this community, to healing, and will factor that into any assessment, but thoroughness requires examining all relationships, especially in specialized fields, with limited practitioner networks. The conversation left Lynn unsettled, defensive of her friend, yet aware that blind trust had enabled Blackstone's operations to continue unchallenged for years. Upon returning to daybreak, she found Grace working in the converted guesthouse clinic, reviewing patient files with characteristic focus. How was the meeting with Blackstone? The doctor asked without looking up. Formative, disturbing? Lynn hesitated before adding, he mentioned someone named Elizabeth Chen, supposedly operating similar contamination schemes in other states. Grace's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their methodical organization. Elizabeth Chen is a common name in Chinese-American communities. Is she a relation? The doctor finally looked up, expression carefully neutral. My aunt. My father's sister. We've had no contact in 20 years. The confirmation landed heavily between them. She was always brilliant. Grace continued, voice deliberately controlled. Chemical engineering corporate strategy, left academia for private industry when I was still in medical school. And you knew nothing about her current activities. I knew she consulted for mining operations, nothing about environmental crimes. Grace's composure wavered slightly, but I suspected something wasn't right. It's partly why I established practice here in a community affected by mining operations, to watch for patterns, address health impacts. Lynn absorbed this revelation with mixed emotions, concern at the undisclosed connection, yet recognition of Grace's consistent efforts to help contamination victims. Federal investigators will have questions. She said finally, I expect they will, and I'll cooperate fully. Grace's expression held both resignation and determination. My aunt's choices aren't mine, but I understand how appearances matter in investigations like this. The moment crystallized something Lynn had been gradually recognizing since Blackstone's downfall. Justice rarely arrived in perfect packages with clear moral boundaries. It emerged messily from complicated human choices from systems where good and evil, often intertwined in the same institutions, the same families, sometimes even the same individuals. Your work here speaks for itself, Lynn said finally, and I trust what I've seen with my own eyes. Relief flickered across Grace's features, quickly masked by professional composure. Thank you, but I understand if you need distance while this plays out. Actually, what I need are allies who understand what we're fighting. You've proven yourself one. Their conversation was interrupted by the clinic's phone. Grace answered her expression, shifting to focused concern as she listened. Noah's mother, she explained after hanging up. Unexpected reaction to the new treatment protocol. Nothing critical, but they're adjusting dosages. Will you need to go to Denver? Not immediately, remote consultation should suffice. Grace gathered her files with practiced efficiency. Though this reinforces the need for a permanent treatment facility here. Too many patients still requiring specialized care. The federal reparations plan included funding for a dedicated medical center focused on contamination victims. Construction had begun at the edge of town, but completion remained months away. Use the main house, Lynn suggested. The East Wing has separate access, plenty of space for examination rooms and equipment. Grace paused, studying her friend's expression. You're already housing the temporary clinic in your guest house. The main house is your private space. It's too large for one person, and Samuel would approve of using it to help others. The decision felt right. Transforming personal space into community resource, private grief into public healing. Another step in the journey from isolated mourning to meaningful connection. The following weeks brought steady progress on multiple fronts. Federal indictments expanded to include Blackstone's associates in other states. Elizabeth Chen was arrested in Idaho, apparently attempting to destroy evidence at a contamination site, matching Blackstone's description. Grace cooperated fully with investigators, providing what limited information she had about her estranged aunt. Her own reputation remained intact, bolstered by years of documented efforts to address mining-related health issues in rural communities. The temporary clinic in Daybreak's East Wing quickly reached capacity, treating patients from throughout the region. Lynn found unexpected satisfaction in transforming the ranch into a recovery center. The land that had sheltered her during grief now offering healing to others similarly harmed. Noah and his mother returned from Denver, tentatively accepting Lynn's offer of the renovated foreman's house. The boy took naturally to ranch work, his earnest nature finding purpose in daily routines. His mother's improvement continued each week, bringing incremental gains in strength and function. Sheriff Wilson provided regular updates on legal proceedings. Ryan Coulter had accepted a plea agreement, testifying against Blackstone's remaining network in exchange for reduced charges. Martha Kingsley continued educating federal marshals about proper rifle maintenance, while providing devastating testimony about historic contamination patterns. Walsh occupied a strange middle ground, neither fully exonerated nor completely condemned. His cooperation proved invaluable to prosecutors, resulting in dozens of additional indictments across multiple states. Yet his complicity in past crimes remained undeniable, ensuring some measure of accountability would eventually find him. Phantom and the other horses thrived, seemingly unaffected by their temporary displacement. The stallion in particular had integrated their adventurous interlude into his personality, displaying heightened alertness around strangers while maintaining absolute loyalty to Lynn. One crisp autumn morning, Lynn rode Phantom to the ridge overlooking daybreak. The valley spread below, touched by seasonal colors. The ranch buildings formed a functional compound, now bustling with medical staff patients, seeking treatment and the daily operations of a working horse farm. Smoke rose from the foreman's house chimney, where Noah and his mother had established their new home vehicles with medical markings, lined the drive to the East Wing Clinic. In the main paddock, younger horses trained by Noah galloped with exuberant energy. The scene bore little resemblance to the isolated existence Lynn had maintained for 2 years after Samuel's death. Life had returned to daybreak, complex, challenging, meaningful life. "We did all right, boy," she told Phantom, patting his muscular neck. "Not what we planned, but maybe something better." The stallion snorted agreement, ears pricked toward the activity below. Agent Rivera's government SUV appeared on the approach road, recognizable by its distinctive profile. The federal agent had become a regular visitor, coordinating ongoing investigations while developing what might cautiously be termed a friendship with Lynn. Phantom carried her down to meet the vehicle, his smooth gait effortlessly navigating the steep descent. "Impressive animal," Rivera noted as Lynn dismounted. "The way he moves almost seems to understand exactly what you want. Before you signal, Samuel said he was special from the beginning. Different level of intelligence, different quality of connection." Rivera nodded, accepting this without the skepticism many would show. "I have updates and a proposal from federal prosecutors." They walked toward the main house, Phantom following, without restraint, like an oversized dog rather than a half-ton stallion. "Elizabeth Chen is cooperating extensively," Rivera explained, confirming Blackstone's information about contamination sites, while adding details about financial structures. 12 new indictments yesterday, and Grace has her name been cleared officially. Complete exoneration. Her documented history of treating contamination victims and raising concerns with regulatory agencies demonstrates consistent opposition to these operations. Relief softened Lynn's expression. Despite her personal confidence in the doctor, official confirmation removed a potential shadow from their collaborative work. The proposal, Rivera continued as they reached the porch, involves expanding your role in the ongoing investigations. "I've already provided testimony for multiple cases. This would go further. Federal investigators want to establish a specialized task force focused on identifying similar operations nationwide. Your experience tracking Blackstone combined with your law enforcement background makes you uniquely qualified to assist Lynn absorb this unexpected development." Consultation or something more formal. Initially consultation, potentially developing into a permanent position if the initiative proves effective. The idea resonated unexpectedly, not returning to traditional law enforcement, but applying those skills to a specialized focus, identifying and stopping operations that deliberately poisoned communities for profit. "They're particularly interested in your tracking methodology," Rivera added. "The way you assembled seemingly unconnected evidence into actionable intelligence. Eagle Eye finding new targets." Lynn mused, the old nickname taking on fresh meaning. "Exactly, though the federal paperwork uses more bureaucratic terminology." They discussed details as they entered the house. The position would allow Lynn to maintain Daybreak as her primary base while traveling to investigate potential sites. Resources would include specialized analytical support, access to environmental testing capabilities, and interagency cooperation. "Why now?" Lynn asked, finally. "Blackstone's case is proceeding successfully. The major players are indicted." Rivera's expression turned somber. "Because we're discovering this is more widespread than initially believed. These operations follow similar patterns across multiple states. Different corporate entities, same methodologies. Suggest potential coordination. A network rather than isolated bad actors. Precisely, and identifying networks requires your particular skill set. The conversation continued over coffee, exploring practical considerations alongside larger implications. By its conclusion, Lynn had tentatively accepted the role consultant initially with parameters to be formalized in coming weeks. After Rivera departed, Lynn found Noah working with the younger horses in the training ring. The boy had developed remarkable skill with the animals, his patient nature perfectly suited to their needs. Agent Rivera had news. He asked, demonstrating unusual perceptiveness for his age. She did, and a job offer of sorts. Noah nodded as though this were expected. You were always going to do more than just run the ranch. Dad said you were too important to stay hidden away forever. The casual reference to Ben Thompson's confidence in her capabilities touched Lynn unexpectedly. Your father said that all the time when you were still sheriff. Noah concentrated on adjusting a training halter. Said Eagle Eye. Morgan was the only person he trusted to find truth, no matter how well hidden. The boy's straightforward assessment reflected his father's practical nature, recognizing capabilities without unnecessary sentimentality. Ben Thompson had seen Lynn clearly during her law enforcement days, understanding that her talents served larger purposes. The federal position would involve travel, she noted, watching for his reaction. You and your mother would need to manage things here sometimes. We can handle it. No hesitation colored his response. Mom's getting stronger every day, I know the routines, and Dr. Chen is right next door if we need anything. His confidence reminded Lynn how much he'd matured through recent events. No longer just a boy with hero worship for a former sheriff, but a young man developing his own capabilities and perspective. Then I think I'll accept the position, she decided, see where it leads. That evening, Lynn sat on Daybreak's porch, watching darkness settle over the valley. Grace joined her, bringing fresh coffee and the comfortable silence of friendship tested by difficult circumstances. Noah mentioned the federal offer. The doctor said finally, You're considering it? More than considering, I think I'm accepting. Lynn studied her friend's expression. Will the clinic manage if I'm traveling regularly? We've established solid protocols. The permanent facility breaks ground next month. Your absence won't impact treatment continuity. Grace's smile held genuine warmth. And it's the right role for you, using your specific talents to prevent others from experiencing what happened here. The validation from someone who had witnessed both Lynn's grief and her reawakening carried particular weight. Grace had seen the transformation from isolated widow to engaged investigator, from private mourning to public purpose. I visited Samuel's grave yesterday. Lynn admitted, first time since the funeral. Grace remained silent, offering space for whatever might follow. For 2 years I couldn't face it, couldn't acknowledge the permanence. Lynn's voice remained steady despite the emotional weight of her words. But now it feels different, not easier exactly, but more integrated. Grief changing shape rather than diminishing. Grace suggested becoming part of you rather than consuming you. Exactly, I can visit him now without falling apart, can remember without being paralyzed. Lynn gazed across the darkening valley. Can continue his work in my own way. The federal task force took shape over subsequent months with Lynn developing methodologies for identifying potential contamination operations. Her approach combined environmental analysis with financial investigation tracking, corporate structures alongside ecological impacts. Her first field assignment took her to Wyoming, where Elizabeth Chen's operation had established elaborate contamination systems similar to Blackstone's Montana facilities. Local residents showed familiar patterns of unexplained illness, property devaluation, and corporate land acquisition. Standing beside a contaminated stream, Lynn experienced powerful déjà vu. Different location, identical criminal methodology, the same disregard for human life in pursuit of profit, the same callous calculation that had taken Samuel's life. With federal resources now supporting her investigation, she systematically documented contamination patterns while tracing their source to corporate decision-makers. The evidence once assembled resulted in federal intervention, facility closure, and criminal indictments. The pattern repeated in Idaho, Washington, and eventually 6 additional states. Each investigation refined her methodology while expanding the task force's understanding of how these operations functioned. Each successful intervention potentially saved lives while holding accountable those who prioritize profit over human welfare. Between assignments, Lynn returned to Daybreak, where ranch operations continued under Noah's increasingly capable management. The temporary clinic transitioned to the permanent treatment facility in town, though Grace maintained regular consultation hours at the ranch for patients unable to travel. Maxwell Blackstone's case proceeded through the federal court system, resulting in multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. His cooperation regarding other operations slightly mitigated financial penalties, but failed to reduce his criminal sentencing. Lynn visited him once more before his transfer to a federal medical prison. The former corporate titan had deteriorated further, his physical condition worsening despite sophisticated treatment. His mental acuity remained sharp, however, calculating even in defeat. "You've been busy, Miss Morgan," he observed as she entered his hospital room. "Wyoming, Idaho, Washington, following the breadcrumbs I provided. And several you didn't mention?" Lynn remained standing rather than taking the visitor's chair. "Your information was selectively incomplete." Blackstone's thin smile acknowledged the observation. "Insurance against immediate obsolescence. Business strategy applies even in confinement. The strategy-failed federal task force has identified 17 operations using your methodologies. 11 already shut down with indictments secured." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his features, quickly masked. "You've exceeded expectations." "Not your expectations. You never saw me clearly. Mr. Blackstone never understood what you were dealing with." "Evidently," he studied her with clinical detachment, "you found purpose in this crusade, channeling grief into productive endeavor. Justice isn't a crusade. It's a responsibility." Semantic distinction. Blackstone adjusted his position, pain briefly evident despite efforts to conceal weakness. "Nevertheless, your effectiveness remains impressive. The network I helped establish took decades to build. You're dismantling it in months. With federal resources and cooperating witnesses, your former associates prove remarkably willing to testify against each other. Honor among thieves is fictional romanticism. Self-interest remains the only reliable motivator." His expression turned speculative. "Including yours, I suspect. Meaning, your pursuit isn't purely altruistic. Miss Morgan, justice for Samuel drives you more effectively than abstract concern for strangers ever could." The observation, though manipulatively intended, contained uncomfortable truth. Personal motivation had indeed provided the emotional fuel for her investigations, the determination to overcome obstacles. "Motivation matters less than results," she replied simply. "Communities protected, accountability established, your operations dismantled." For now, Blackstone's voice carried the detached certainty of a man accustomed to long-term strategic thinking. "But market forces remain constant. Demand for resources continues. New methodologies will develop. Different operators will emerge, and we'll identify them too. Perhaps it's an interesting inflection point in our societal development." Despite his diminished physical state, Blackstone's analytical mind remained formidable. The balance between resource acquisition and environmental consequence, between profit motive and community welfare, that balance doesn't justify murder. From your perspective, others might calculate differently, weighing regional economic development against limited health impacts. The casual framing of deliberate poisoning as limited health impacts exemplified the fundamental disconnect in Blackstone's worldview: human suffering reduced to acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of financial objectives. "You still don't understand what you destroyed," Lynn observed. "Not just lives, but trust, community cohesion, faith in systems meant to protect public welfare. Collateral effects of necessary progress." Blackstone's dismissal seemed genuine rather than deliberately provocative. History judges accomplishment, not methodology. Industrial Revolution, Transcontinental Railroad, Manhattan Project all produced human casualties alongside transformative advancement. Is that how you justify Samuel's death? Collateral effect of necessary progress? Your husband chose opposition to market-efficient resource development. Actions have consequences in competitive environments. The cold calculation behind his words no longer provoked rage as it once might have. Instead, Lynn felt something closer to pity, recognition of a fundamentally damaged moral framework, a mind brilliant in certain dimensions, while catastrophically limited in others. "Goodbye, Mr. Blackstone," she said finally. "The task force will continue dismantling your network. Communities will recover from your market-efficient poisoning, and history will remember you as a cautionary example rather than the visionary you imagined yourself to be." His response followed her to the door. "We'll see which narrative prevails. Miss Morgan, time renders interesting verdicts." The encounter reinforced Lynn's commitment to the federal task force. Blackstone represented a particular kind of threat, not merely criminal activity, but systematic exploitation of regulatory gaps, political influence, and public trust. Combating such threats required specialized focus and methodology. Over the following year, her work expanded to include training other investigators in identifying contamination operations. The patterns became increasingly clear: corporate structures designed to obscure responsibility, regulatory agencies compromised through strategic hiring, health impacts deliberately misattributed to other causes. Between assignments, Daybreak Ranch evolved into a different enterprise than Samuel had originally envisioned. While maintaining horse breeding operations, it had expanded to include rehabilitation services for contamination victims, specialized training facilities and educational programs about environmental protection. Noah, now approaching 18, had developed into a capable ranch manager with particular talent for the horse breeding program. His mother's recovery had plateaued at approximately 80% of previous function, significant disability remaining, but with adequate adaptation for meaningful activity. Grace Chen's reputation had grown nationally as an expert in treating contamination victims. The permanent treatment facility in town bore Samuel Morgan's name, a fitting tribute to the man whose investigation had ultimately exposed Blackstone's criminal enterprise. Sheriff Wilson had leveraged her role in the Blackstone case to secure additional resources for rural law enforcement, establishing innovative programs for addressing environmental crimes in neighboring counties. Ryan Coulter served his reduced sentence in minimum security, his cooperation having significantly advanced multiple prosecutions. Reports suggested he had found purpose in prison ministry, perhaps seeking redemption through service to others. Maxwell Blackstone died 14 months into his sentence, complications from injuries sustained in the helicopter crash. According to official records, Lynn received the news during an investigation in Oregon. Her reaction, more contemplative than triumphant: justice had been served through legal process rather than personal vengeance, accountability established through systematic exposure rather than individual retaliation. Upon returning to Daybreak after Blackstone's death, Lynn found the ranch blanketed in early snow. The building stood solid against the whiteness, smoke rising from chimneys, lights glowing from windows. No longer just her isolated refuge, but a community of purpose. Phantom greeted her at the paddock fence, his powerful presence unchanged despite advancing years. The bond between them had deepened through shared experience, mutual trust forged in crisis and affirmed in recovery. Noah emerged from the barn, his tall frame reminding Lynn how quickly he was growing from boy to man. "Welcome back, successful trip. 3 indictments, facility shut down, remediation plan established." She dismounted from the ranch truck. "How are things here?" 2 new foals, clinic at capacity. Mom had a good week, walked to town and back yesterday. The simple report encompassed multiple triumphs, each representing healing and progress, where Blackstone had intended only profit extraction regardless of human cost. Inside the main house, Lynn found a letter waiting. Maxwell Blackstone's personal effects released following standard procedures for deceased inmates. The package contained what appeared to be a journal addressed specifically to her, with instructions for delivery upon his death. She opened it cautiously, half expecting final manipulation attempts. Instead, she found methodical documentation of contamination operations beyond those already identified by the task force. Locations, corporate structures, chemical methodologies, all detailed with Blackstone's characteristic precision. A brief note accompanied the technical information. Ms. Morgan, competition ultimately benefits from elevated standards. These operations employ inferior methodologies with excessive collateral impact. Their continuation damages legitimate resource development through regulatory overreaction, address as you see fit. Justice and market efficiency occasionally align MB. Even in death, Blackstone remained true to his distorted worldview, framing exposure of criminal enterprises as market correction rather than moral imperative. Yet the information appeared genuine, potentially allowing intervention before additional communities suffered irreversible harm. Lynn contacted Agent Rivera, immediately initiating verification protocols for Blackstone's final intelligence contribution. Preliminary analysis confirmed operational patterns consistent with previously identified contamination methods. That evening, she rode Phantom along familiar trails, processing the complex emotions triggered by Blackstone's posthumous communication. Not guilt or grief at his passing, but a strange sense of completion. One chapter closing as others continued developing from the highest ridge. Daybreak Ranch spread below in twilight softened contours. The main house glowed with multiple windows, illuminated east wing, where visiting specialists consulted with contamination victims main section, where Noah and his mother joined Grace for their regular dinner gathering. The scene embodied transformation, personal tragedy, expanded into community purpose. Individual healing grown into collective recovery. Not what Samuel and Lynn had originally planned for their ranch, but perhaps something more meaningful than they could have imagined. Phantom snorted softly, shifting beneath her as though sensing her reflective mood. "We did all right, boy," she told him, echoing words spoken months earlier from the same vantage point. "Found our way through the darkness." The stallion's ears flicked back, listening to her voice with characteristic attention. His powerful presence represented continuity through change, a living connection to Samuel to their shared past, while remaining firmly anchored in present purpose. As they descended toward home, Lynn reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From grief-stricken widow to determined investigator, from isolated mourner to community builder. From Eagle Eye the tracker to something more complex, a woman who combined professional skills with personal conviction to protect communities from systematic harm. Samuel would have approved, she thought, not just of justice served for his murder, but of purpose found beyond vengeance, of healing expanded beyond personal recovery to community restoration. The lights of daybreak guided them home through gathering darkness. Not an ending, but a continuation, a life redirected rather than merely restored. The ranch Samuel had loved transformed into something that honored his memory through ongoing purpose rather than preserved grief. Justice had come for Maxwell Blackstone and his criminal enterprise. But more importantly, healing had come for Lynn Morgan and the community she had once withdrawn from in grief. Different kinds of justice, perhaps, but equally necessary for wounds to finally close. Phantom carried her toward those welcoming lights, his powerful stride covering ground with confident purpose. Behind them, the mountains stood silent, witness to both past and present, unchanging backdrop to human stories of loss and recovery, harm and healing justice. Delayed but ultimately delivered, Eagle Eye. Morgan had found her targets. Justice had been served, and life continued richer and more meaningful than grief alone could ever have permitted. The first snow of winter blankets the valley as I stand on the ridge, overlooking what we've built. Not what Samuel and I had planned, but something with deeper roots now. They say justice is blind, but I've learned it sees just fine. It simply moves at its own pace. Gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment, like a tracker following signs. Others miss the corporation that poisoned our water, that took my husband's life, that thought nothing of sacrificing an entire community for profit. They've answered for their crimes, not through vengeance, but through truth dragged into daylight. I used to think healing meant forgetting, moving on, leaving the past buried like Samuel in that quiet cemetery. Now I understand differently. Healing is integration, carrying what happened while refusing to be defined solely by it. Phantom grazes nearby, his powerful presence, a reminder that some bonds survive even our darkest moments. The ranch bustles below, no longer my sanctuary from the world, but a place where others find their own healing. The mountains will remain long after our struggles fade from memory. They've witnessed countless stories like mine, lost pursuit, reckoning, renewal. What remains after justice is served? Something harder to define, but more essential. The quiet certainty that some battles, no matter how devastating, are worth fighting to the end,